Shilajit is one of the world's most popular superfoods. It's loaded with over 40 trace minerals, fulvic and humid acids, antioxidants, and more. It's a resin or tar-like substance that seeps out of the rocks of the Himalayas at extremely high altitudes, formed from centuries worth of decomposing plant matter and microbial activity, distilled by pure rainwater and pressurized by tons of mountainous rock. In a way, you could say it's kind of like the lifeblood of the earth itself, and we can use it to enhance our daily lives by absorbing its power into our body cells. However, if you've tried Shilajit in the past, you know it's true when I say it does not taste good, and that almost seems like an understatement. Some people say it's like licking an old used ashtray, and some people get a little more descriptive than that. Let your imagination run wild. It's pretty bad. But one thing is for certain. I've tried tons of Shilajit products, and no one has ever been able to cover the flavor, let alone make it taste good, until now. My friends at Organifi just released these new Shilajit gummies, and they actually taste good. They deliver 250 milligrams per serving of pure Himalayan Shilajit. Shilajit's benefits include supporting energy production, healthy hormone levels, performance and recovery, promoting collagen synthesis and heart health, increasing cellular energy, and decreasing fatigue. Shilajit has become super trendy in the superfoods and holistic health world for obvious reasons, and people have long been desperate for a solution to the flavor problem. That's why in the few months since Organifi released these, they've already sold out several times. Visit Organifi.com/TWF. That's Organifi.com/TWF, or just head to the show notes. Take a look at their whole collection, and when you go to check out, use promo code TWF. That code is going to give you a 20% discount on all of their products, and they have a lot of amazing products other than their Shilajit gummies. Find out how these superfoods can help you on your health journey today with Organifi. Dr. Garrett Smith is a licensed naturopathic physician in the state of Arizona. Since starting his medical practice in 2006, he has helped thousands of people to fix their chronic disease permanently. Through his focus on correcting vitamin A toxicity, and he has vitamin in air quotes, specific nutrient deficiencies via hair and blood testing, and his paradigm-shifting Toxic Bile Theory, which we're going to get into today, approaches to health, Dr. Smith gets amazing results for his clients that other practitioners and approaches were unable to previously. In his spare time, he enjoys training in the gym and shooting competitions. That's why you asked if I like shooting.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you do shooting competitions. Okay, that's awesome. Yeah, so we've had some conversations on the way over here, and just in that time, I'm like bringing up some of the things that I've done for my health, and you're like, I don't know about that. So I'm sure we're going to get into some stuff today that both myself and the audience will find that they have not heard of, and that they may want to reconsider some of their approaches with respect to their health, especially if they're struggling to detoxify, or they're struggling with some chronic issue. They feel like they're doing everything right, in air quotes, according to what holistic health, this whole holistic health, alternative health space says they should be doing. So let's start with you sharing how you came across vitamin A as a toxin, because that's not something that we regularly hear, especially, even in like holistic health coaching certifications, I'm sure in naturopathic medical school, chiropractic school, talking about vitamin A being a necessary vitamin. It's found in carrots and things like this, typically orange fruits and vegetables, and it's highly necessary for eyesight health, et cetera, et cetera. So how did you come to understand that vitamin A is not what we're told?
Well, the short story of it was at the time I was doing mainly hair mineral analysis in my practice, which I still use. Except I've totally re-engineered it. I kind of reverse engineered it and figured out why they were doing certain things and what actually worked and what didn't. But in the hair analysis world, they use vitamin A to lower hair calcium. They're using it as a very specific drug effect. And
what is the purpose of lowering hair calcium?
Well, okay, hair calcium on a hair test. On a hair test, when you have high hair calcium, it tends to mean that you are pulling calcium out of the bones into the blood. And over time, so it's not showing, it doesn't mean people have high calcium all the time, but it means that there's more calcium in the blood than the body wants. And then the body is pushing some of it out into the hair.
Mm.
So if you have more if you have more calcium in the blood over time than you want, I mean, one of the ways the body can push it is into the hair, but it could also push it into the soft tissues, the joints, the brain, the muscles, and all that stuff. So we generally want to bring that down. I mean, most adults have high hair calcium out there. So I was taught to use that, and I just followed the instructions. And for some people, I was using, liver pills to increase their vitamin A. For some people, I was always recommending high vitamin A foods. I was giving retinol palmitate drops to give them vitamin A.
Is this sort of a function of just regurgitating what you had learned in naturopathic school at this point?
Well, sense. I mean, hair mineral analysis was not naturopathic school. That was definitely outside.
I meant in terms of the paradigm of what foods and what nutrients, minerals, vitamins are necessary.
Yeah. It was what I was taught about hair analysis. And when I watched the hair tests, it worked.
Mm-hmm.
So they said it does this, and I watched it and it did that.
Got it.
So eventually because I'm always trying to be better than I was before, I started noticing that it was going really well for people. But over time, people I'd had for 2 or 3 years, which is where I look. Like, I don't want the
most want the snapshot.
People want the quick results. They're like, look at this testimony and look at this. And I'm like, I want people getting better still at 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Right. Like, those are the testimonials I want, because that means you're really doing the right things. And I was having people come back to me and they're saying, Doc, I'm like feeling kind of tired, or my hair seems to be shedding a little bit and I don't know what's going on. And I was sitting there going, I'd tell them, things to do. And I was like, this is one of the things I guess I do differently. I was looking at it going, I didn't assume they were not doing the work. I said, I'm doing something. I'm missing something.
Yeah.
I'm not getting something. So then I was going along, and Matt Stone of 180 Degree Health, he's a true contrarian of health. He just loved to go against mainstream on everything. But he said in one of his Facebook posts, he was talking about Grant Genereux and vitamin A toxicity. And he said he thought I should look into it. And I kind of, with a lot of ideas, I go, okay, that's interesting. I'm going to let it marinate. We're going to see if it comes up again, if it's just like a fad. Because I was like defending my own. I'm like, well, I'm still using vitamin A. I don't know if I want to.
Oh, we're using vitamin A supplements in some cases?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
So then it came up again. Matt wrote a blog post. I read about it. And Matt made some really good points about all muscle meat carnivores weren't dying of vitamin A deficiency. Mm-hmm. They also weren't dying of vitamin C deficiency. And I started going, okay, this is interesting. And he said in the comments, he was talking to somebody, he said, I really hope that Dr. Smith looks into the work. I was like, okay, here we go. So I got Grant's free ebooks and I started reading them. I got about halfway through the first book. And I was like, I have to change everything. Wow. I've been giving people this, and now I'm learning about vitamin A toxicity. And I'd had another client who told me, she's like, I think I have vitamin A toxicity. And before I saw Grant's work, I was like, I don't think so. We're not giving you that much. And, I used to believe it only comes from supplements. Mm-hmm. People would say, oh yeah, no, natural vitamin A can't hurt you. And I go, well, then why is polar bear liver deadly? Like, we can smash that in one example. Polar bear liver, eating it will kill you. And it's well known in the Inuit communities, they have a condition called pick block toe, which is where, especially, it tends to happen more with women, but women will basically lose their minds. And the researchers were saying, we think it's because they eat a lot of fish and they eat a lot of, seal and livers and all these high vitamin A foods. And that's what actually drives these people crazy.
Wow.
So I looked into that, and then I thought, okay, so I'm going to start doing this. So I started eating low vitamin A, and I started having my clients do it, and we started seeing good results. And I saw over time, I had some psoriasis. I saw that go away. My dad died of prostate cancer, and I was developing urinary prostate type issues in my mid-20s in medical school. Mm. And I was like, this is really bad. Like, I'm 25 and I'm getting urinary issues, and my dad's, had prostate cancer now for it was like 8 years back then.
Mm-hmm.
When I got to change something. So I started doing that. The urinary issues went away. I had really terrible chronic insomnia. That went away. And then I just went, okay, so we're on this. Now, the funny thing was after the vitamin A thing, when I first got into hair analysis, in the hair analysis world, they would say, well, vitamin D supplements will raise your hair calcium and they'll lower your hair potassium, which is basically like a hypothyroid pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And back then I was 2013, I was doing vitamin D finger prick tests in my office. That's how important I thought it was. And then all of a sudden I got into hair testing, and then I learned about this, and then I went, I'm not going to give vitamin D anymore at all. And so then I had to tell all my clients back then, I'm like, we're done with vitamin D. We are not doing that. We're done. And then all of a sudden, a couple of years later, then it was the vitamin A thing. And then I'm like, no, stop. No more.
Did your clients appreciate that you were willing to admit that you're still continuing to learn? Because for me, that's the sign of someone who's doing the best for their clients. If they're willing to admit, hey, I was incorrect in what I said before, but I could see where some would say, well, that means this guy has no idea what he's doing. And I think that's the fear that people have. And that's why people, despite countless lines of evidence in their face, refuse to change their position because they don't want to be made to look stupid. But I'm on the pursuit of what is true.
Right.
And I think people over time appreciate that.
Yeah. I just told them, I basically said, I guess in a certain way, I didn't care what they thought about it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was more interested in the truth and in getting them better. And so I just said, look, like, it's basically new information came to light. We're not doing this anymore. I'm going to suggest you don't ever take this again. What you do with what you have left around, like, you can toss it. I wouldn't give it to anybody, but I was like, you can do whatever you want, but we're not doing that anymore. Yeah. And so, yeah, I really, the people who appreciate, when somebody can change their stance with new information, that I really like those people. That's probably why we're chatting today. And then the other people go, well, you're wrong. I remember once my buddy, I was into a certain diet at one time, and my buddy goes, but you were so sure about this other thing. And I go, well, first of all, if you go to a doctor and they're not confident in what they're doing, you're going to walk right out. Right. So, they have to be confident in what they're doing. That's why they're doing it. And, new information came to light, and I was just like, we got to change. So, and then recently I just did another kind of 180. At first I used to think that B3, as in niacin, as in flesh niacin, was not good for people. And then after learning more about it from Kelsey Kenny and realizing that the different types of niacin, that flesh niacin, aka nicotinic acid, was really the only good one, and all the other ones are trash, then I changed. I tested her theories. I took a lot of it to prove that it was safe. Mm. And I've only gotten better since in other ways. I was already gotten rid of most of my stuff, so I didn't have a lot of ways to go, but I got even better on other things.
Well, we're going to get into that. We're going to get into vitamin D, flesh niacin. We're going to get into all those things. I want to continue to touch on vitamin A. So what you read about vitamin A shifted your entire approach to your practice. And I'm just curious to just get in your mind on what it was that sort of tipped the scale in the other direction, reading about vitamin A. Obviously, you've brought up like the issue with polar bear livers and these people who are getting picto or whatever it was called. Yeah. But what specifically did you read that made you completely reconsider your approach with vitamin A?
Well, it was some stuff in the books that is in the research. So a lot of people will say that natural vitamin A and synthetic vitamin A are somehow different. That's always the claim. Mm-hmm. And technically, scientists use the exact same chemical procedures to identify vitamin A, whether it's in food or whether it's in your Accutane pill.
Right.
Right. So once I went on that, I was like, well, their chemical structure is the same. So if one is not good for you, then the other one's not good for you. And then if people can eat polar bear liver and get sick, then it's the same. Like there's no difference. People will start to do a weird excuse of they'll be like, but then that's too much. And I go, no, you just said it wasn't dangerous at all. And now it is dangerous at a certain dose. So that just, a lot of the arguments for vitamin A, just, they're so easy to tear through. But the biggest one was when you learn about retinoic acids. So retinoic acids are what conventional nutrition science says are the active forms of vitamin A. That's the stuff that actually does something. And when I learned that as you detoxify, so people will say metabolize vitamin A, and I'm like, no, it's a detoxification process. It's the same enzymes that alcohol goes through. So as I started to learn that retinol goes through the same detox enzymes as alcohol, I went, wait, this is not right.
Metabolization, it's
right.
detoxification.
It's detox.
Yeah.
And then you get to retinoic acids. And in the literature, Accutane is a byproduct. Accutane is one of the things created when you eat vitamin A. 13-cis-retinoic acid is Accutane. I found papers that showed that there was basically 13-cis-retinoic acid normally in normal people's blood and urine. So if you're eating vitamin A, you're taking Accutane, basically.
Wow.
Then we got into all-trans retinoic acid, which is another form of the active form of vitamin A. So if you see studies and they just say retinoic acid, that's usually what they mean is all-trans retinoic acid. Well, when you learn that all-trans retinoic acid, when they put it into a kind of a paste form and they put it on people's faces, they call that a chemical peel. So it's dissolving the upper layers of cells on people's faces.
Wow.
So imagine if you're eating vitamin A and converting it into all-trans retinoic acid, and then it's leaking into your system. I mean, the funny thing is I never hear people really say what causes leaky gut. Well, in the medical literature, they talk about all-trans retinoic acid and the chemical peels as creating a controlled wound to the skin. So imagine if you have this dissolving, uncontrolled wound agent going through your tissues. Back on the 13-cis-retinoic acid with Accutane, I mean, people know about the horrible side effects of Accutane.
Right.
But that's
like even mental side effects too.
Well, there's a paper out there. The paper, I believe, if I can recall the title correctly, it was 3 separate lines of evidence showing retinoids, vitamin A, as causal to schizophrenia.
Yeah.
That's the title of the paper, causal, like root cause.
That's insane.
So there was Accutane with the side effects. There was Atra as the chemical peel, and then the other main retinoic acid that is made from vitamin A when you eat the natural stuff is 9-cis-retinoic acid, also known as alitretinoin, also known as chemotherapy. Wow. So I was like, wow. And then I started to realize that like people, when they do this carrot juice thing for cancer, in effect, they're basically, that's the vitamin A in the carrots is going to effectively turn into chemotherapy.
Interesting.
In their system, and it's going to do all the same problems that.
So with high vitamin A foods, let's go through the list of foods that are high in vitamin A, because this is probably
I can do it. It's pretty short.
Okay.
So the biggest ones, I mean, so this is not an all-encompassing list, but this is the biggest ones. So in the plant world, we got to distinguish here. So the colors you want to think of: yellow, orange, red, dark green. But when I talk about that, I mean the part of the plant that you're eating.
Got it.
Okay, so like a banana, right? The yellow on the outside, whitish on the inside. That's okay. So, or like if somebody had a cucumber and you peel it, that's okay. So those are the big plant sources of vitamin A. So red, yellow, orange, dark green.
That's a lot of foods though.
I mean, I'm a big fan of bananas, so it works for me. And like apples. Yeah. Here's a funny thing. So apples are whitish on the inside, right? And if you look into the research, apples and bananas are apples are number 1 and bananas are number 2 in terms of being the healthiest fruits out there. The research shows it. And they're the lowest in vitamin A.
Interesting.
And apples are very high in pectin, which helps grab onto bile, which helps you poop it out, which is we'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
So then we get into animal foods. So the biggest animal foods in terms of vitamin A would be egg yolks. Not the whites so much, but we don't tend to eat the whites either because that's a sulfur problem. That's a whole nother problem. Then we get into dairy and pork And what's the other one? Oh, organ meats.
I was just about to ask that.
Liver, yeah.
Well, especially because so many people are claiming health benefits with organ meats. What are your thoughts on that?
I always ask them for the large database of research that they have backing up that organ meats do anything good for anybody who's not malnourished.
Wow.
I asked this on Twitter of Heart and Soil Supplements the other day.
Yeah, I know Paul.
And I said, just show me a large database of research, because I've got my whole big thread on part 1 and part 2 of liver being toxic to humans and animals.
Interesting.
And I said, show me this database you have of research. They didn't reply. They never reply. It's not science. It's just made up.
What about the work of, let's say, Weston A. Price, who, yeah. Okay, it's clear you've already looked into that because you laughed.
Well,
so I'd love to hear your thoughts, because his whole shtick was that he traveled the world and he found that peoples who ate nose to tail and, incorporated grains that were sprouted and incorporated fruits and vegetables, but primarily ate animal fats and animal proteins, but were eating nose to tail, were living healthy, long lives. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, let's just throw this out there that this as well as anybody here. We're not always told the truth, are we?
Mm-hmm.
So some of those stories may have been embellished or made up.
Right.
Next, when they're talking about Weston Price and American kids, well, what were American kids probably getting? They were probably getting shots and meds and all the other toxic crap that we do here. And then when he's going off to the Swiss Alps or whatever, are they getting any of that?
Right.
No. Then they're getting sun and they're getting exercise and they're getting all this stuff. Now, in my cod liver oil thread on Twitter, I go over 3 separate instances where Weston Price himself, in published papers, said that cod liver oil could be injurious to children, that it could worsen their allergic diseases.
Is that because it's high in vitamin A?
And D.
And D. Okay.
Yeah. So, and I have a quote from him where he was telling his nieces and nephews, this is in Nourishing Traditions, saying that you got to stay under a certain dose or it can become problematic. So even the magical cod liver oil, Weston Price warned about, you can do too much of this and some kids are going to react badly. And he actually said that the kids fighting so much against taking it, to the point of even throwing it back up, was a self-preservation pattern.
Wow.
So what do the kids know that we don't? What kids like generally white foods, right?
Mm-hmm.
And fairly bland foods. White foods. So when we talked about what are low vitamin A foods, well, in the plant world, the part that you're eating, white, off-white, or light green.
Mm-hmm.
What do kids generally like? White, off-white, maybe light green,
mm-hmm.
and not too spicy, not too flavorful, all that stuff. Their toxin sensors are still working.
Interesting.
They haven't worked around their toxin sensors like adults have, where you have adults drinking bourbon and coffee and all these things that actually taste quite like, nobody eats 100% cocoa because it tastes horrible.
Yeah.
I mean, people do, but they're forcing themselves to.
Right.
So these things
even
are
like 80%, 90% cacao is like,
It's bitter. Bitter
so
is, bitter. I mean, I can go over in the research, bitter is a flavor of toxicity.
Interesting.
But we can adjust our taste. We actually have a survival mechanism for things that we don't like to eat, because like, imagine if you're somewhere and all you have to eat is like a certain weed, right? You can live on it,
right?
But it tastes horrible.
Mm-hmm.
Well, over time, like mindset's important, right? So if over time, if you're having to eat this over and over and over, you could either get more and more sick of it, and then not only are you eating this thing that's not so great for you, but you're poisoning your brain,
mm-hmm.
or you could somehow train yourself to like it,
mm-hmm.
which is going to be better for you in the long run. Well, at least you think you like it, but then people cultivate tastes for these toxic things, and they think it's a good thing, and it's absolutely not.
Oh, man. Already blown my mind. So I'd imagine then nightshades themselves are probably pretty bad, because I was going through the list in my head: dark greens, reds, yellows. That's peppers right there, right? Obviously, onions would probably be okay.
Well, they're not a nightshade, though.
No, I know. I'm just going through the list.
Onions are high sulfur. We don't do those either.
Oh man. Okay. So what obviously you don't do a like sort of prescribed diet. We were talking about that on the way over here, which I really appreciate that like, oh, you must eat this rigorous diet. It's going to be unique to the individual, obviously. But what are some foods you do generally recommend? And I guess the second part to that question is, and I think this is probably rhetorical at this point, otherwise you wouldn't be doing this. Have you found that this is successful in helping people reverse chronic issues?
Yes. Okay. So have we found it to be successful in reversing chronic issues? Yes, we could go into that more of some of the biggest examples. But the foods that people are generally figuring out their own, dietary approach, because like an example, we do like beans. Mm-hmm. Beans are very high in soluble fiber. When we get into toxic bile theory, adsorbing, grabbing things that grab onto bile and help you poop it out, very, very
high
helpful.
Fiber foods are good.
Well, high soluble fiber.
High soluble fiber. Okay.
Yes, those are our favorites. We'll put it that way. I mean, insoluble fiber has its place. I mean, there is no, you don't get pure soluble or pure insoluble fiber foods in nature. So you're always going to get some of the other. But looking at the higher percentage of soluble fiber, that's what we like. Mm. So like beans, as an example, beans are one of the things that people might eat a lot of. Some people get along great with beans. Some people I don't
do well with beans. Yeah.
So some people thank me for giving them the okay to eat beans because like paleo said no and whatever. Right. And I give them the okay and they're like, I feel amazing on this. And then there's people who don't.
Yeah.
And I go.
And I wonder, because I ate paleo for quite some time, I wonder if that's like, because you can't discount how much this plays a part in it. If I'm creating that story like, no, beans are bad in my head, that's then making me feel some sort of way when I eat beans.
Absolutely. So there, the programming is strong.
That's a tough one.
So with like the beans, if somebody tries them over and over, they're like, Doc, I tried them over and over. I just don't get along with them. And I say, then don't eat them. Yeah. It's very simple. I have a saying that I do with this, Doc, it hurts when I do this. Well, then don't do that. Like if somebody's like, I don't feel good when I eat bananas. Doc, I heard you eat 3 bananas a day, but I don't feel good when I eat them. Don't freaking eat them. Yeah. That's why I don't like telling people like what I normally eat, because then they think that I have like some perfect diet.
Right.
And that everybody should model my diet. And I'm going, that's not what we do.
Right.
So the things that we tend to eat on the program, generally, meat wise, we're not anti-meat at all. People start hearing me talk about beans and they think I'm somehow anti-meat or something.
Right. And you're against organ meats here. So it's against like, organ this meats, guy must not.
Right. Yeah. But so muscle meats, but that's where the weird thing with organ meats is, it's like, cause tongue is a muscle, but you call it an organ meat, but it's a muscle. Like people go, well, what about heart? I'm like, fine. You want to eat heart? It's a muscle. What? I don't care. But so red meat and poultry are the big ones.
Okay.
We tend to avoid fish because fish and shellfish are just full of mercury. They're just, they're bottom feeders. They're, what do you think eats the crap in the ocean? Like
that's right. So tough. Cause I love fish so much.
I mean, I like it. I would eat it if it was okay, but I just don't. So red meat and poultry are there. Then we talk about things like,
what about wild caught salmon that is specifically non-oceanic salmon?
If I knew the mercury testing on it, maybe.
Okay.
Well, salmon has another issue. The color in salmon is from astaxanthin, which is a carotenoid, which is a vitamin A.
Okay.
So I would personally be trying to eat white fish if I was. Generally, if you think of it in nature, white things in this approach.
Like mahi or sea bass, but then it's sea bass, so then it
mahi-mahi's full of mercury.
Oh man. Okay.
So that's why usually we do have some generalities. It's like, and I can tell how I can give people an estimate of how much fish or shellfish they eat on their hair test mercury. Like and I don't care where it's from.
You show us there's a very strong correlation. You'd say, okay, wow.
I mean, I used to be able to tell people it looks like once a week or twice a week or 3 times a week. Like, I got to that point. Now most of the people who are coming to me, their mercury on the hair test is almost gone because they're already doing my stuff. And that's how we get it down.
So real quick, before we continue, is this an accurate statement? The reason cultures across civilization, different parts of the world, eating different foods based on their location, thrived given their location is because despite eating some toxic substances, they were not exposed to as much environmental toxins as we are today.
Yes. So toxicity, once it comes in you, slows down your detox.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes sense.
But people don't seem to get that. Like there was
simple.
There was a study on mice where they gave the mice like young mice alcohol, and they saw their ALDH, one of the most important detox enzyme in the body. They saw that ramp up to deal with the alcohol. Okay, then they gave alcohol to the older mice, and their ALDH actually slowed down. Okay, so what gives people hangovers is acetaldehyde from the ethanol. So the ethanol goes through ADH, which is alcohol dehydrogenase. It turns into acetaldehyde. This is what will kill you from alcohol poisoning. This is what gives you hangovers. All of us know from drinking when we were younger, you could drink when you were younger and not get a hangover. But as you get older, the hangovers get worse and worse.
Increase in toxicity in your body.
Because you're getting toxic over time from all sorts of angles.
Right.
And then your ALDH is slowing down. And then you have more acetaldehyde, which is what gives you hangovers.
Makes sense.
So that's just one example. One of the biggest things we do in the program is not try to speed up ALDH. We try to just take the brakes off of it.
Got it.
We try to give the nutrients that we need. We try to not put in aldehydes. And then we just let it come back, and then it works. So where were we at?
So what I had asked originally is the foods that you typically recommend. So you talked about meats, but you're talking about muscle meats.
Muscle meats, absolutely muscle meats. And then so we get into grains, unprocessed, grains, unrefined grains. But if somebody was like, oh, I'm going to have some white flour bread that's not fortified, I'm like, okay, sure.
So you're also against fortification.
Oh, fortification is absolutely.
I did a whole episode on that recently.
It's Depop, dude.
It's so crazy. I just learned that the other day, and it has blown my mind. Like one of the biggest. I got to give a shout out to Dr. Tatum Toner, also a doctor who has come around to understand that germ theory is nonsense on her own, which I really appreciate. We did a whole episode on food fortification and how it's incredibly toxic, and she showed that the increase in use of folic acid in our food coincides directly with all-cause mortality going up in like all categories in the late 1990s.
Well, and then the form of niacin that they use in the fortification is niacinamide, which is the junk form, the bad form, and that will the way that is interacting with the folic acid and the methylation. It's Depop. I can't find the paper anymore. There was a guy that sold it was like whey protein and egg protein. But on his site, he had a paper cited that said one of the reasons Canada supposedly outlawed fortified flour for a long time because of this one study. They gave mice fortified flour versus just the white flour. And then they had them do the swimming until they die or until they drown test. The ones who got the fortified flour were like sunk right away. So it's obviously bad for people.
Wow.
I wish I could find that paper though. I can't find that paper anymore. And
I'll ask Tatum and see if she has, because that's her shtick.
And now Canada is they're fortifying everything. They're making it. They've gone beyond. So.
Oh man.
So yeah.
Okay. So non-fortified, non-refined
grains generally. Yeah. I mean, but especially the ones that we find that are the highest in soluble fiber would be oats.
Okay.
And barley.
Okay.
But barley has so much fiber in it, it actually kicks people's butts.
It's so crazy. This is such a flip on its head of what much of the holistic health community has come to understand through the paleo diet and things like this Whole30, that like grains are really bad. And I've been incorporating sourdough bread lately that's organic, and I feel completely fine.
Yep. So just watch out for the butter.
I love butter. What about ghee? What about ghee? It's yellow though, so
ghee is more yellow than butter, right?
Yeah, it is.
Well, we were kind of talking about this earlier.
Butter can be kind of white, so if I get like really white butter, is that
the whiter the butter, in theory, the less vitamin A that's in it. But so when you make ghee, right, you do a couple things. You clarify it, so you take out the little proteins in it, but then you're also heating it, which is an oxidizer.
Yeah.
So that actually is taking the thing about vitamin A. There's a very interesting concept here. Well, it's not a concept. It's actually true. It's either called intoxification or biotransformation.
Okay.
Which is a process when the liver's turning one compound into another. Sometimes it turns the compounds into less toxic things.
Okay.
Sometimes it turns the compounds into more toxic things.
Wow, through the liver.
Right, like the ethanol into acetaldehyde.
Okay.
The ethanol doesn't kill you, it's the acetaldehyde that does. And the bottleneck's at ALDH. Okay, so vitamin A, as it goes through the detox process, actually becomes more dangerous.
Interesting.
I mean, we can look at it two ways. The all-trans retinoic acid, there was a huge study on veterans where they gave them retin-A, which is all-trans retinoic acid, to put on their faces to prevent skin cancer. They had to stop the study because too many of them were dying early. And they had already selected out the veterans who they thought were likely to die early.
Wow.
And they shut that study down. But then you go all the way back to carotenoids like beta carotene. 3 separate beta carotene studies, large studies, were stopped because they were dying early or getting cancer too early. Like too many people in the actual vitamin group. Beta carotene is a disaster in studies.
Oh my goodness.
And they just keep giving it. They keep looking for reasons to give it to people. And that beta carotene is the one thing. Here's the weird thing. Beta carotene and carotenoids, it's very specifically stated in the literature that they are not essential nutrients in any way. But then somehow there's a vitamin that's made from them that is essential. How is the base product not essential, but then detox products along the way are? It's really weird. You start getting into vitamins, and then I could show that when people talk about the retinoic acid receptor or the retinoid X receptor, I've got research showing that they'll say you need vitamin A to stimulate this. And I go, I can show you in the research where it says that these receptors can be stimulated with nothing at all. Or they've said there's another paper where they have a whole database and they're like, there are 7,500 compounds that can stimulate these receptors. And I'm like, so you need this one vitamin, right? It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
I've taken this apart in multiple ways.
What about the people who, let's say raw vegans who are eating lots of foods that are fruits primarily that are yellow, dark green, red, and orange, and are thriving for years?
Well, I think some people don't need as much protein as others. I do think there is some pretty huge inter-individual variation in protein needs. Like I don't need as much protein as like all the meathead guys on Twitter are saying you should eat. I'm never going to eat that much, and I seem to be doing just fine in the gym. So like the raw vegan question, one of the things that you need to absorb vitamin A is fat. So if they were eating a very low fat diet or no added fats,
their bodies aren't uptaking vitamin A.
They're not going to take up much of it. So if they can get enough protein and they're not, and maybe they just don't have, I've had people who hardly need any zinc at all. Most of us need a lot of zinc from muscle meat, but some people hardly need any. I saw a woman refill her entire zinc stores with like 5 milligrams of extra zinc a day. That was all it took. And I was like, I've never seen this. So there is, I mean, can vegans do what we do? Well, if people come to me and they're like, Doc, I just don't ever feel good when I eat muscle meat. I just don't. I tried it. Like, I just feel better when I don't eat it. When people come to me and it's a health thing and they say, I don't feel good when I eat this, then I say, okay, that's legit.
Yeah, stop eating it.
Where it's like, I have a saying about it, which your physiology doesn't care what your philosophy is. So if you're a person who needs meat and you just decide I'm not going to eat meat and your health just goes, that's
right.
Your physiology doesn't care.
Right.
So, but if somebody else is going, I just never feel good when I eat meat, then I go, okay, well then we got to figure out a way around it. And it's going to be some hard work because you got to get enough protein. You got to get enough zinc, might want to take some taurine. And we just got to make sure that you cover your bases so that you can do this. And then it's fine. Like I don't have a lot of dogma in terms of like, we don't have a perfect diet for any one person. And that confuses people.
Right.
Because then they have to do work.
Yeah. Yeah. They have to do their own experiments on themselves to figure out what's best for themselves.
They can't blame me for saying you have to eat oats. And they're like, I don't feel good on oats. And then I go, well, they can't blame me for their failure.
Yeah.
Then I'll try something else.
Okay. So we got unrefined, unfortified grains. We have muscle meats.
Yeah. Beans. But when I'm talking about beans, I mean like the beans you cook. I'm not talking about peanuts. I'm not talking about green beans. I've
actually heard recently though that the idea that peanuts are bad for us is a total lie. Have
Dude,
you
I
looked
ain't
into that at
touching
all?
peanuts. They're full of aflatoxin.
Really?
Yeah.
I'll have to send it to you. I'd love to get your
When you
opinion
go and look inside some peanut shells,
Mhm.
crack them open and look for the silky white coating on the inside of the shell. It looks like a spider web.
Mm-hmm.
That's mold.
Uh-huh.
I'm not touching peanuts. No.
Okay. Got it.
So generally, I mean, if people wanted to eat them, like I always tell people, you can eat whatever you want. I don't care.
Mm-hmm.
But
are you of the mindset at the least that if you're thriving and you've been thriving for some time doing what you're doing, just don't stop? Sure, that's fine. Or
depends on how long. Like if somebody told me that they've been doing something for 50 years and they're doing well, I'd be like, okay. But most of the time it's like somebody's like, well, I switched to this new diet 6 months ago and I'm thriving. And I'm
let's say like 5 years though.
Somebody's been toxicity accumulates.
Yeah.
It takes time. So if somebody started from a lower accumulation level, they have a longer time until they get there.
Got it. Okay.
So it could be, another saying I have is my car worked just fine until it broke. Right? We tend to have, massive failures at one point. It's usually a bunch of little failures all of a sudden, and then you have the massive failure.
Well,
so
when I interviewed Lauren Lockman, he's guided over 2,000 people through extended water fasts, and he had this guy who he was trying to get to do a water fast. It was like, I don't need it. I never get sick. And then at age 58, the guy dropped dead from a heart attack.
We talked about that.
Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
That's
always the thing. They're like, he was so healthy. And I go, well, maybe his insides weren't.
Right.
He looked healthy from the outside and he may have been working out like crazy, but that doesn't mean in high school, I remember our wrestling. No, I wasn't in wrestling, but the wrestling coach, he was super fit. And all of a sudden he's just out running around the park track and he just dies of a heart attack.
Yeah.
That was where I started going, oh wait, everything's not quite right here.
Yeah. What is healthy? Yeah.
Right.
What is the definition of healthy here? Okay. So we keep getting off on tangents. That's my fault.
I do it all the time.
Yeah, I do it too. This is bad. If we both do it, then So back to the foods that you typically recommend.
Yeah, I'll try to stick. Okay. So we talked about, we did meat, we did grains, we did beans. Then with fruits, generally, I mean, the best fruits that we think of, it's not the only fruits on the program, but we tend to think of bananas, apples, maybe some pears, grapes, stuff like, stuff that's
what about
light green
blackberries or
high in polyphenols? Those tend to slow ALDH. We don't tend to do those.
What about blueberries?
If it's high in antioxidants, it tends to be slowing your detox system.
Damn it. Okay.
I'm not against them
that's
on
so strange
occasion.
Because I've heard people say that eating wild blueberries are good for detoxification.
What evidence are they using? This is the BS thing. Okay, so no, this is an important thing to address. Out there when people are like, milk thistle's good for detoxifying your liver, and I go, okay, wait, you have some short-term studies or maybe some cell studies.
Yeah, and that's such a good point because in vitro does not indicate what happens in vivo.
Actually, I don't know, maybe you agree with this or not, but what I see in cell studies is what they show in cell studies is exactly the opposite of what happens in whole bodies over time. I have a whole term for it. I call it duration paradox. It's like vitamin A. They'll do retinoic acid in cell studies and they'll be like, this fixes the protein that causes Alzheimer's. And then they did tons of studies trying to show that retinoic acid was good for Alzheimer's. They never published any of them.
Yeah.
Because none of them came out good.
Well, I mean, just the entire idea that you can excise tissue from I've said this so many times, I feel like I'm beating a dead horse here. You can excise tissue from a complex physical, chemical, emotional, spiritual, electric, biological being, and then throw a bunch of shit in it in a lab with these presuppositions, overlooking countless assumptions, get a result and think that represents what happens in the human body is insane.
Yeah.
It's insane.
Yes.
So...
Yeah, there's no. I actually one of the reasons I think they do it is because it's only like one cell turnover, right?
Yeah.
So you can't show toxicity accumulation.
Yeah.
So you hide the whole toxicity problem. It's kind of like the duration paradox is most easily explained with coffee, like caffeine, right? At the beginning, caffeine is amazing, right? So much energy, so much focus. I mean, unless you have too much, and then it's like liquid anxiety,
yeah,
right? But then over time, people get more tired.
Yeah.
And then they have to have coffee just to be normal. And then they start getting even more tired and they can't even get back to normal. That's what I call the duration paradox. Is almost every drug out there, the very thing it's supposed to help, it will eventually cause that problem. Just like if you look at the side effects of any drug, that drug can eventually potentially cause that same problem that it's supposedly fixing. I joke now that with pharmaceuticals, the indication, the thing that the pharmaceutical is supposed to treat, is simply its most common side effect. That's what it is. It's the side effect of a toxin.
Absolutely. I mean, that's my wife's experience for sure when it comes to her reversing naturally her autoimmune conditions that she had. And I think autoimmune conditions are literally just accumulation of toxicity in the body expressing in a unique way depending on that individual. That's all that it is.
Well,
that's mostly what disease is, period, though.
They measure autoimmunity, how bad it is, by antibodies, right?
Yeah.
Antibodies are proteins made by the body to bind to toxins.
Yeah.
So they're saying you're looking at toxins in the system. Yeah. We're measuring this toxicity in your system. It never made sense.
And they're non-specific, too. That's a whole nother rabbit hole on antibodies. My goodness. Yeah, I already know, but...
So we did the fruits. Oh, the vegetables. Vegetables are basically like the ones that are...
Potatoes are okay, I'd imagine?
That's a nightshade, bro.
Dang it. I know, but they're not colored nightshades.
Potatoes are so the vegetables, generally, we're talking about the white, light, off-white, light green.
But white
the
potatoes.
Parts that you eat. They are white.
Yeah.
What I've seen in practice, I was kind of actually... funny aside, since I was talking about Weston Price earlier, I spoke at their convention in 2010 on nightshades. So nightshades was kind of one of the food areas I was kind of an expert in before that. So the worst nightshades are eggplant, peppers, capsicum. The spicier they are, the worse.
I love spicy food.
Tomatoes.
Sucks.
And then we get into, goji berries are one. Tobacco is one.
Yeah.
But then we get into potatoes. Okay, potatoes are what I call the sneakiest nightshade. I'll have people, and you want to peel them. Okay, here's just an idea about peeling foods. If you had a city to protect, right? What do you tend to want to build around it?
Some sort of fortification, some sort of wall.
Wall with defenses, right? So
defense chemicals in the skin.
Yep.
Yeah.
So plants put their chemical defenses mostly in the skin because you don't want all the toxicity inside where you're trying to make new seeds and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So there's that. So don't eat the skin.
Obviously, I do not condone eating GMO foods or foods that are sprayed with non-organic foods. But I have heard, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this just briefly, that if you are going to consume non-organic fruits and vegetables, eat ones that have skin that you take off anyway, because the insides are going to be less toxic.
Yes, absolutely. I would totally agree with that. Yeah. Yes. And so, if you were somewhere and you're like, dang, they don't have organic bananas, and you have to get a normal banana, I'm not going to freak out about that.
Yeah.
But definitely try to buy organic whenever you can.
Absolutely.
The potatoes. The potatoes, it's one of those things where I'll have people come to me and they'll say, well, I do fine on potatoes. I mean, I like potatoes because they're really high in potassium. Potassium's a huge thing in my program. But then, so this is always the thing. They eat them, and then months later they come to me and they're like, Doc, I don't know why, but my asthma's coming back. I'm having this problem coming back. And I'm like, are you still eating potatoes? And they're like, yeah, I do totally fine on them. I'm like, are you really?
Yeah.
Your asthma's coming back? And they're like, oh no. And I go, why don't you try taking them out for a month and see how you do? And they take them out and they're like, damn it, you were right. And I'm like,
yeah,
what can I say? But the potatoes can take a long time to build up.
Okay.
The nightshades in general, once you get healthier and you get clean of that stuff in you, I can eat. I used to have such a bad nightshade problem that I could eat them. I'd go and I'd eat Mexican food and I'd eat a lot of salsa. And I'd have, my neck would I'd start cracking my neck because my neck would start hurting. And by the time I was leaving the restaurant, if you ever crack your neck, you know what I'm talking about. I had cracked it so much it wouldn't crack anymore. And now I was just left with the pain. In the meal, I knew what was happening. I still chose to do it. And then I hurt. And that would take a couple days to go away. Now I could eat that if I wanted to. And it's only if I were to eat if I were to violate the nightshades 3 days in a row, that I start to really notice my sleep goes to heck, joints start to hurt and all that stuff. So I can get away with more of it now, should I choose to.
Right.
But is it worth
as long as you get your toxicity down quite a bit, then these what we could call foodborne toxins, these things inherent to food that might be toxic to us, are not going to cause as many problems.
Right.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, we are designed. I mean, nature is war.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, the plants have chemical toxins in them that they don't want to be eaten. Like people think, oh, the plants are just, they want to be eaten. And it's like, no, they don't.
They can't run away. So they produce defense chemicals.
So one of the funny things is that people always come to me and they're like, but why are all my favorite fruits are high in vitamin A? And I'm like, they're all yellow and orange and red and all that stuff. And the other thing is they're really, really sweet. How do we get children to take bitter medicines?
Sweeten them.
Sweeten them.
Yeah.
So if you want to cover the taste of a poison,
sweeten,
you add sugar to it. Nature does the same thing.
Interesting.
So nature wants the seeds to be spread. It's still got poison in it, but it's still going to put the sugar in there so it's palatable.
Yeah.
And then we can breed them, hybridize them to make even more of those qualities.
Oh man. Okay, so vegetables that are good to eat then.
Oh gosh, it's a pretty short list. I mean, some of these are different people. Some people who do the vitamin A diet don't eat any vegetables at all. Some people feel really freed. They're like, oh my gosh, I don't have to eat any more vegetables.
It's interesting because kids naturally, when they're younger, they hate vegetables. And I've thought about that quite a bit. I mean, obviously here you disagree on some fundamental things with Dr. Paul Saladino, but even he has pointed that out to me. And I'm like, that's such a good point. Like kids naturally they are very averse to vegetables.
I mean, so we're looking at things that are like, if we're talking about kind of leafy things, we're talking about lighter colored stuff. We're talking about like
iceberg lettuce,
maybe romaine lettuce maybe people chop off the dark ends. Butter lettuce. Some people might get into cabbage, which is another sulfur thing, but the cauliflower, cucumbers, which is technically a fruit.
Yeah.
But some people will even go as far as like if they have zucchini or the crookneck squash that's white on the inside, just peel them real well. And then they seem to do fine on the inside.
Okay.
So yeah, it's a pretty short list.
And how would you know, or what is the strongest indication of vitamin A toxicity? Just are you attributing that to just chronic illness in general? You find typically people with chronic issues do have high vitamin A levels?
Well, that's where we get into levels. Like that's where we want to test it. That's where we can't test it because the only true test of vitamin A toxicity is a liver biopsy.
That's a good point because I'm personally very skeptical of labs in general, especially because it's literally just a snapshot in time that is subject to change literally 24 hours later. Yeah. And then people are making these wild health decisions. Practitioners are leading people to make these wild health decisions based on a snapshot in time that was different the day before, different a few hours before possibly, or different the day after. Yeah. Like I know people say when you get lab work done, you're not supposed to eat a few hours beforehand, but that's just not, I mean, even if you do not eat a few hours beforehand, the food from the last week, month, like whatever is going to be causing that test to fluctuate in certain ways.
That's one reason I like the hair test is I look at the hair test as it's like an accumulation of blood tests over time.
Yeah, makes sense.
So people say it's reflecting what's in the cell. And I'm going, I don't know about that. I don't know that I totally agree with that. But it's definitely, I mean, what's the hair made from? The blood that flows by it. So either the blood that's flowing by the hair follicle is either going to deposit extra stuff or it's not going to let go of what it wants to keep.
Got it.
And so then we can get kind of, I use blood and hair. And let's say zinc, I have people skip the zinc the day of and the day before. So I can get, because that's really that's the main mineral I look for in the blood. And then I correlate that with the hair test. And then I have multiple markers. Like zinc is really, really, really important. And that's why I don't know too many other people who look at two different angles on it.
That makes sense, though. It makes sense to do that. And I could see where a liver biopsy would be the only accurate way because you're looking at what's deposited there.
Yes.
Or what's not deposited there, present there that should be.
Right. I did a whole thread on Twitter about the vitamin A toxicity epidemic as shown by liver biopsies in multiple countries around the world since the 1950s. Like they always talk about Africa having vitamin A deficiency. Well, there was 2 studies where they were looking at liver biopsies. 50% of the people had vitamin A toxicity in their liver.
Wow.
So they were looking at blood tests and saying they're deficient. We got to give them more vitamin A. But then when they finally looked at the liver, it was something like South Africa, where they have like supplements and food fortification, and their people are eating liver. They said something like 72.5% of the kids were vitamin A toxic.
Wow.
So, but this doesn't show up in the bloods.
Right.
Because
it's being deposited.
Well, they're only measuring retinol. They're not measuring retinaldehyde. They're not measuring retinoic acid.
These are all forms of
vitamin A that if they don't measure for them, they don't see it.
And correct me if I'm wrong, is it vitamin A no, vitamin D is the oxidized cholesterol, right?
Yes, vitamin D is an oxidized form of cholesterol.
Okay.
Yes. So, but the diet generally, that's the general gist of, the foods. People can find new things that fit. It's generally principles.
Yeah.
And then people run with it from there. But yeah, we do like our soluble fiber, the big soluble fiber foods, apples, pears are all right. Oats, barley, beans. Those are the big soluble fiber foods. So we just get people who they find what they do best on.
Mm-hmm.
Like I do great on apples, and I'm not super great on beans or oats, but if I have them, sporadically, I do fine. But if I have them like days in a row, I don't feel so great. So I just don't have them days in a row.
Makes sense. Easy. And I think that the point of emphasis here is if you've already gotten to a lowered toxicity threshold, then you will be mostly fine eating these things that are high in vitamin A.
Well, you can. Okay, so it's like a bank account.
Yeah.
You want your bank account to, if we're talking about toxicity in the liver, if you want your bank account to go down, you want your toxicity to go down, it's like your balance. You got to put less in than you're taking out.
Mm-hmm.
You're trying to empty the account. Yeah. So you don't want to add to it and you want to take more out. We don't know what that rate is. People are like, well, how can you tell how fast you're getting rid of it? And I'm like, you don't ever get to know. So it's in general, we say it's better to err on the side of putting less in than putting more in and hoping.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody the other day asked me, they're like, well, they had quite a few health issues, and they're like, can I do a cup of raw milk on this program? I'm like, well, even though it's raw, still got vitamin A, still got vitamin D, still got a lot of calcium. Vitamin A and vitamin D cause problems with calcium. You're at the start of the program. That means you're the most toxic you're ever going to be, and that means your detox is running slower than it will later. You could shoot yourself in the foot right now by insisting on doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had people who were doing the program, and they're like, I didn't make any progress until I got rid of the raw milk. Like they did all the other things, but they were like, no, raw milk is good. It's all okay. And I was like, come find me later. That's what I do with a lot of these things. I'm just like, come find me later.
How long have you been doing this approach?
This approach, I am coming up on personally 6 years. In September.
And you have how many clients, would you say?
Well, in the Love Your Liver program, there's more than 2,000 people.
Wow.
But that's a do-it-yourself program.
Okay.
That's not my active clients.
Yeah.
But, it's a lot of people. I mean, the YouTube's got like 7,500 people on it.
Yeah.
So it's going.
But the point is you've had quite a few people adopt this approach and find that they're reversing issues that they've had.
We have very vocal fans on Twitter who are, we're getting more and more people every day.
Those vocal fans on Twitter were the ones who hit me up and were like, you got to interview Dr. Garrett Smith. And I was like, all right, I'll do it.
It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. If you're enjoying this episode, please consider sharing it with at least one friend or family member who you think could benefit from hearing it. You help us grow and reach more people by sharing it with those around you. Also, be sure to head to the show notes to check out our membership offerings, membership marketplace, and more. In nearly all cases with modern health systems, you're waiting months for appointments only to spend a mere 10 minutes with a doctor who quickly hands out a generic diagnosis that is likely rooted in a total misunderstanding of health and causes, and then you're offered a one-size-fits-all medication or invasive treatments with unpleasant side effects. If this sounds all too familiar, consider a different approach with the New Biology Clinic, founded by Dr. Tom Cowan, a respected natural health doctor, author, and speaker. Dr. Cowan's holistic perspective on health and wellness and a deep understanding of the true nature of health and disease sets this clinic apart. With the New Biology Clinic, it's not about quick fixes and suppressing symptoms. The practitioners take time to understand your unique story, recognizing that health is unique to the individual and that illnesses have a variety of causes, physically and metaphysically. Members of the New Biology Clinic enjoy a flat monthly fee that includes a range of valuable services like health consults as needed, practitioner-led live streams on diverse health topics, access to a members-only resource library, and multiple live group sessions every month. These sessions cover fitness, breathing integration, biofield tuning, guided meditation, EFT tapping, and much more. Unlike traditional healthcare systems that thrive on frequent visits, prescriptions, treatments, and suppressing symptoms, the New Biology Clinic's motivation is to make you healthy and keep you that way. Visit newbiologyclinic.com to learn more and use code THEWAYFORWARD for $50 off your account activation. If you're a member of The Way Forward, email hello@thewayforward.com to receive $150 off your account activation. Your journey to genuine healing begins here. All right, so now I want to move on to vitamin D because that's another one that is a very, very hot topic. Even in the terrain-based health community, we have people on one side who say vitamin D is rat poison that you should stay away from at all costs. And then on the other side, there's vitamin D. Yes, the best source of it is from the sun, but if you can't get enough sunlight, it doesn't hurt to supplement vitamin D. And I will say for myself, I tend to lean more towards the former than the latter. But then I've also had several of my friends, some who are practitioners, who have recommended to their clients or prescribed to their patients vitamin D as a supplement, and the patients seem to get better. And I don't know. I wasn't there. I didn't prescribe them that. I didn't see whether that lasted only a few months or if it lasted 4 to 5 years. I'm obviously a natural health maximalist, and I don't take many supplements myself. Like the only supplements I really take are magnesium supplements. So yeah, I'd just love to hear your thoughts on all that, all things related to vitamin D.
Well, so yeah, I think I was saying back in 2013, I tend to be an early adopter, and I was really into vitamin D like 2013. And I was doing, like I said, the skin prick tests in my office, and I thought it was really, really important. And when I got down to it, when I started learning about it, as I was watching people more, I want results, right? And so if I'm going to have somebody take something, I need to see something happen. And I just didn't see it with vitamin D. I was giving a lot of it, and I like a lot. I mean, when I first started learning about the hair test thing about vitamin D and what vitamin D does, it raises calcium on a hair test and it lowers potassium, which, like I said, is a hypothyroid. When you look at high calcium and low potassium, that's hypothyroid.
Interesting.
So I started thinking about that, and then I used to think I was real smart, and I was getting lazy with the vitamin D. So I thought, I'll get these 25,000 unit pills from Thorne, and I'll take 2 of them on Sunday. And that'll be 50,000 for the week. That'll be 7,000 a day ish. And then I can just do it once a day or once a week, and I'll be fine. And I'm doing more than the 5,000. So I'm better than just 5,000, right? Because more is better. And I started to notice after a couple weeks of doing that I wouldn't poop for like 2 whole days.
Mm-hmm.
And that was going from like 3 a day to none a day for 2 days. And I went, something's wrong here. And I was reading in this book from another guy. I don't want to mention it because I don't want people to go down that rabbit hole, because that was a terrible rabbit hole. But it was, he said, too much vitamin D can constipate in this book. And I'm going, okay, wait. Hair test, vitamin D raises calcium, lowers potassium. That's a hypothyroid pattern. Constipation goes with hypothyroid. I take too much vitamin D, I get constipation for 2 days. It's all starting to fit together now.
Right.
So I started to see that on the hair test, and then I decided to get everybody off of it. As I did more and more research, I kind of started uncovering things about, when dairy companies would add too much vitamin D to the milk, some babies died. There was actually a history of fortification of milk. This was back in the 50s. I have it on my Twitter. Like, children were dying, and they're like, they just have an enzyme deficiency of this very particular genetic enzyme deficiency. And they stopped fortifying the foods for a while because children were dying from it. But now nobody's testing it. They're bringing it all back.
Yeah.
And then when I finally went and I looked, I forget, maybe somebody on Twitter said vitamin D3 is rat poison. Then I go and I'm like, that's an interesting statement because, I always thought it was Coumadin and warfarin, right? And I go and I look it up and I find Tera D3, Tera D3, and D-Con. That's the name of the product, D-Con. I mean, are we talking about a con here maybe?
Yeah.
And then I started learning about how it sends dogs and cats to the vet a bunch of times because their kidneys are failing from eating the vitamin D. And people go, oh, it's the dose. And I go, sometimes these things are just poisons. And then this is where it gets better. In South Africa, back during the apartheid days, they actually trialed out vitamin D as a genocidal poison to use on people.
Straight vitamin D.
Yeah. So they were going to give people enough to kill them, like rat poison.
Wow.
And then people just keep bringing up this. It's the dose that makes the poison. And I'm going, it's a form of oxidized cholesterol. Like so vitamin D is your body makes cholesterol. It goes up to the skin. The sunlight hits it. It oxidizes it, and then it goes back into your system. I'm just sitting there going, how is this? Like I started thinking, okay, we need sunlight. We need light. Like humans need light. That's why we don't have a lot of hair.
Right.
So we can absorb sun. And I was going, okay, so maybe it's just that we need light, but maybe this thing that they've sold us on, this narrative of vitamin D being the most important thing, isn't the truth.
Well, could it be that in some way you could say vitamin D itself is a hormonal byproduct of light that itself is toxic, and it's like the sun is helping us to detox?
So I haven't gotten so far as I haven't gone so far as like I still hedge my bets on some of these things that are pretty far out there.
Yeah.
But
I know this is speculation though.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is like, because I've thought about that, especially as I've come to question vitamin D. It's like, but we've been taught that vitamin D, that's what we're getting from the sun. And I was already on the page that like, there's so much more we're getting from the sun than we can even possibly fathom. It is the source of life here in this realm. With that being said, okay, so they've measured something, and God knows how they even determined how they measured it, or any of these vitamins for that matter. Right. And I know we're on the same page on that. But assuming that they have measured something that they're calling vitamin D, could it be that it is literally just a detoxification process, this compound that we're pointing to, that is the result of the sun detoxifying us? And then again, as is the case with countless things in modern medicine, we point to that and think that, oh no, this vitamin D is the cause of our health, when really it's the sun and the light that is the cause of the health, and this is the toxic byproduct.
Yes. Well, very much so. When people talk about vitamin D levels in health, they usually quote studies where they're looking at people who they're measuring their natural, like walking around vitamin D levels
from the sun,
not
from supplementation,
from the sun or whatever.
Right.
I mean, but
or
like,
from food.
You give a low protein diet will lower your vitamin D levels. A low zinc diet will lower your vitamin D levels. A low magnesium diet will lower your vitamin D levels. Do we think people out there are deficient in a lot of these things? Yeah.
Yeah.
So then they're saying, so maybe these people just, would it be healthier if you got more zinc and more magnesium and more protein? Probably.
Right.
So would those people be healthier? Yes. Would we also see increased vitamin D levels there too? Yes. Taking a vitamin D pill, does that fix your protein intake?
No.
Does that fix your zinc intake?
No.
Does that fix your magnesium intake?
Again, this is all about like not treating the root cause.
Right. And so they take this, and then how many people have you known who took vitamin D pills and their vitamin D level didn't change?
I know a few actually.
And some of them even went down.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's it doing? Like, what is the body doing with this stuff? So I just get into, we need light. And I know we need zinc, and I know we need magnesium, and I know we need protein. I actually did a whole thread on Twitter about how rickets is a meat deficiency. And I showed the evidence of all of this. Like, it's a protein deficiency, it's a zinc deficiency, and it's just overall calorie deficiency. So funny thing about the Weston Price work with rickets and cod liver oil and stuff, he's giving them oil. What does oil have a lot in it? Calories. He gave him just calories. You put a starving kid on a protein calorie malnourished kid on protein and fat, how many diseases does starvation cause? So all of a sudden, oh, wow, we gave them this, and they're saying this is the magic thing that's in this. And I'm going, no, you gave them calories. They were probably malnourished kids, and you gave them some meat. Sense. So where are we going? On the vitamin D thing. So when I found out about all those things that didn't point in the right direction, I don't like people dying from things. I don't really care about the dose so much. Like when I talk about this, like I gave myself an IV of magnesium sulfate once. I gave myself 5 grams, 5,000 milligrams of magnesium in a 30-minute period. The worst thing I felt was I felt warm and I felt a little stoned for a bit. That was it. It wasn't, 5 grams of magnesium in a half hour is a ton. Yeah. And it didn't do anything to me. Right. But so like vitamin D will mess people up. I get people on Twitter all the time. They get off their vitamin D. They see my stuff and they go, I'm not so stiff anymore. My joints aren't popping anymore. I sleep better. I'm in less pain. And I just go, this is what's going on. Or they'll say my leg twitches stop at night because we have the research on mice that vitamin D increases the amount of potassium you waste out of your kidneys. So you lose more potassium just by taking it. Potassium's huge for energy and all sorts of things. Yeah. So yeah, it just started to make sense to me. And as I got people off of it, people were like, I feel better. And I just started going, this is not good. So I have a mega thread on Twitter all about vitamin D, but
we'll post all the threads you've referenced in the show notes.
I talk about so sunlight is best. And people like we were kind of talking on the way here, you said, well, there's people who live in places where there's not a lot of sun and they're going to take their vitamin D. Okay. They could also buy a tanning lamp.
I have been looking into this recently. I was talking with my wife about it a couple times. I am convinced that tanning beds aren't bad. It's another micro example of the sun. This claim that the sun causes cancer is nonsense. It's that we're using toxic sunscreens and we're eating toxic foods that are being baked into our skin, and that's causing cancer. Then we're blaming the sun. Likewise, when it comes to tanning beds, it's not the tanning beds. It's that we're putting this toxic shit on us before we get into the tanning beds.
Well, it's not. That's true. That's true. I mean, people need to realize that you put sunscreen on your skin, it's in your blood. Yeah. Like that's been shown in the research, undeniably. Yeah. 24 hours later, I
think I've seen or heard you, because I've watched a few of your videos, reference this study that they did on mice or on some animals where they like shaved them. Yeah. And can you talk about that?
So yeah, they had mice. The Environmental Working Group talks about this study a lot. So they had mice. They shaved an area of their hair and they put on either regular sunscreen or they put on sunscreen with vitamin A in it. And then they used this like sun mimicking light. And most people don't realize that most of the studies they use about the sun being good for you is actually UV light in a lab. So a lot of the studies where they're trying to say that this means the sun is good for you because it raises vitamin D, it was done with UV lights in a lab. So the mice that got the sunscreen with the vitamin A in it got more tumors, bigger tumors, faster tumors. Wow. So vitamin A in your skin is not good. So this is where we get into things get complicated. So all of the early research that said that tanning beds was bad just so happened to be sponsored by L'Oreal. L'Oreal makes sunscreen. Obviously, we have a conflict of interest there. So are people getting skin cancer regardless, whether they're wearing sunscreen or not? People are getting sunscreen all over skin cancer all over the place. Right. They're getting skin cancer all over the place. So I believe that cancer is an accumulation of toxicity. So sunscreens are bad. I'm not going to argue that. They're terrible. However, let's just say, so on Twitter, there's a guy, Really Tan Man. He likes to talk about people getting tans. He says that to get a really good tan, you have to eat lots of vitamin A. Interesting. Okay. It is known in the science that vitamin A, especially retinoic acids, is what's called a photosensitizer. Do you know what that means? It means it makes you more easily burned by the sun. Interesting. So we have a guy saying you need vitamin A to tan, and people, it's like the same thing. Well, I won't get into birth control pills, but vitamin A will make you more photosensitive. What do we see in the real world with people who do this work? My work. They are they stop burning when they go out in the sun, and they don't tan. They still go out in the sun.
You live in Arizona. You spend a lot of time in the sun?
I mean, I go to my gun competitions and I'm walking every morning, and like, so I'm not.
It's pretty wild. You're not like crazy tan.
No, I'm white, man. I'm white. So
yeah, but you'd expect like living in Arizona in the sun as much as you are, lack of humidity, so the sun's really beating
like my
down
head
on you.
is in the sun like every time I go outside, and it's not tan.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So then multiple people say this. They're like, I can go out in the sun, I don't burn anymore.
Yeah.
And I don't really, like, you get like 5% of the tan that you used to.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the sun doing in your skin? The sun is actually, so a sunburn, so right, you get redness, and then eventually there might be tingling, there's pain, eventually you get itching, and you get skin peeling. What if I were to tell you that, let's say somebody ate sled dog liver or polar bear liver or some other really high vitamin A liver, that the exact same symptoms happen to somebody after they poison themselves with vitamin A acutely. Their skin turns red. It hurts. There's the tingling. There's the itching. Their skin falls, like they peel.
Mm-hmm.
It's the exact same thing. So what if, so the acute vitamin A toxicity, that's a detox process. The body's taking the vitamin A that it put in the skin through a detox process, and as it goes through the different stages, it causes the different symptoms. So what if the sun is simply oxidizing, which is the detox process of vitamin A? It's oxidizing the vitamin A in the skin and taking you through the same detox process with the same steps. So, so then what if, okay. And it's actually been shown that vitamin A levels and vitamin D levels in the skin tend to go opposite. So if you get a lot of sun, it's going to lower your vitamin A levels in your skin, and you're going to see your vitamin D go up. What if the health benefit was the vitamin A going down, and it's not the vitamin D at all?
Wow.
So yeah, it all becomes very interesting. But what about, like, okay, so let's say somebody's going out in the sun a lot, or they're going to tanning beds, or they're doing whatever light they want, and they're really vitamin A toxic. And I mean, we all know that if you look at people who tan a lot, the leathery, like the old look and all that stuff. I mean, it's aging the skin. Oxidizing ages things. Anybody knows that when you see a sign outside that's oxidized, it gets pale. It goes, there's even, the oxidation is so bad these days. You've seen the signs turning black?
Yeah.
Sun's not quite the same as it used to be.
Yeah, it's interesting.
But anyway.
Or there's something in between the sun and us as a medium now that's being sprayed, possibly.
There's all sorts of
There's
things.
A lot
we don't need to go into that today. So when we get into the sunlight, so could the sun increase skin cancer, which is toxicity in the skin, by oxidizing the vitamin A into worse forms, charring it in the skin?
Yeah.
So could it be true? Could the sun prevent skin cancer in certain people who are not super toxic by lowering their vitamin A levels? Yes. Could it also, in people who are really toxic, char it and get it stuck there and then cause skin cancer? So can it be both?
It totally could.
Yes.
Yeah, that could make sense. Yeah. I mean, even before I realized vitamin A toxicity, I've thought that, like, for people who are highly toxic, they probably would benefit from, for some time, not getting prolonged exposure to sunlight until they can reduce their toxicity in other ways. Then at that point, the sun can be detoxifying. But at first, it's going to be, it's so hard for me to verbalize the sun causes issues, but you get what I'm getting.
Yeah, no, okay, so I deal with, like, the sickest of the sick people.
Yeah.
Like people who can't even go inside houses because they're so chemically sensitive or so EMF sensitive. People, there's like the Twitter guys who are like, everybody needs to exercise and and I'm like, y'all don't even understand how sick of people I get. They go out for a walk and they're wrecked. Is that going to be good for them for me to tell them you have to go walk for 20 minutes? If it just wrecks them for 3 days. So what we do, like with the sun, I'm like, I had a young girl who was so toxic, she would, like, lock herself in her room in the dark for like 36 hours. And this was right after she started puberty. Puberty is a big time when the liver goes haywire, especially for girls. So anyway, we were working with her, and her parents got her a spurty lamp, a sun lamp. And they did it for like 30 seconds on her calves. And they're like, she was a mess for like 2 days.
Wow.
Because the sun and heat will increase your bile dumping. We'll get into that in toxic bile theory, but it just messed her up. So I said, okay, you're either not doing that much or you're doing less, like 10 seconds, maybe. Or maybe you just wait a while and then we do it later. So yeah, so certain things can be, I mean, that's funny where people will say the poison is in the dose, right? It could be like, you may not be able, is exercise good for people? Is the sun, if we wanted to say generally, is exercise generally good for people? Yeah. Is the sun generally good for people? Yeah. Is warmth generally good for people? Yes. If you are super duper sick, you may not tolerate any of those because it's revving up your detox system, which is full of toxins and really slow. And you're just kind of like driving the car with the emergency brake on.
Mobilizing those toxins for the body to get it out, and it might be too much too soon.
If you got bottlenecks and you can't get them out, then they just back up in the system. So yeah, that's why I tell people, like, with the sun, okay, you're watching with the sun or tanning beds or tanning lamps or whatever, you're watching for, if you feel significantly worse after you do it, you did too much. Okay. If you're noticing skin changes, negative skin changes, you're doing too much. That's it.
Yeah.
So then back off and then everything's fine.
So, and it's really as simple as, if you are deficient in, quote, vitamin D, then just get more exposure to light. But probably do it incrementally over time, not prolonged exposure.
Well, I mean, if you were doing a tanning bed, you might try a minute.
Yeah.
And then if a minute's fine. Well, actually, what it used to be known, I talked to somebody who lived in Alaska, and they're like, my doctor told me this in Alaska. They said 8 minutes a week of a tanning bed, 8 minutes total a week. So you could break it up into multiple sessions, was enough to maintain your vitamin D levels. And they knew that. I mean, you can get a cheap gym membership and use their tanning beds and be done. Or you can buy a $500 Spurdy lamp. And none of these things involve having to take rat poison. Now, one thing I want to tell you, we'll get into this in toxic bile theory, but when people take vitamin D supplements or vitamin A supplements in general, that reduces your bile production, which we'll get into with toxic bile theory. But if you push out less, you leak less, and you can feel better for a while.
In air quotes.
But then the problem, the toxicity is building up because you're not getting rid of it. And then eventually the dam breaks and then you're in big trouble.
Got it. Okay. So your opinion, again, is that vitamin D as a supplement, avoid it.
I would not ever have anybody take it.
Got it. Yeah. That's pretty much where I am too, I think. Especially because if you can just find other clever ways to access light in general, it's going to be much better for you.
And I tend to think that all light is pretty much good light. So if you can go out if somebody goes out for an hour in the morning, and they're like, but the vitamin D monitor says this doesn't count. I'm like, I don't care what that says. Like, it's light. Get it, go outside, get some light in your eyes. Like, it doesn't mean stare at the sun, but get some light in your eyes, get some light on your skin. You'll be all right. And we have people in the program who have better vitamin D levels than they've ever had. And we don't take pills, and they're just doing their zinc and their magnesium and their protein and getting some light. And that's it. And we don't try to do it. Like, I don't try to fix vitamin D levels. We do these other things so we can avoid naturally the poison. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense. Okay, now I want to get into toxic bile theory, because this one is fascinating to me, especially as it relates to terrain and the no virus position, because you're of the mindset, as am I, that disease is caused by toxicity. I'd also add emotional toxicity to that. That's another thing that I think is an implication for disease. That's my opinion. We can talk about that.
Well, I would add nutrient mineral deficiencies and nutrient deficiencies.
Mineral deficiency, nutrient deficiency, toxicity, and then I would say emotions that are unprocessed, undealt with. So
yes,
that's what causes illness in my mind. A unique combination of those for the individual. But yeah, toxic bile theory sounds fascinating, especially because you've sort of recontextualized, as you've come to understand, that viruses are a totally unproven paradigm, which I also appreciate. Kudos to you, because there's more and more doctors who are starting to realize this and come out of the woodworks, which I really appreciate, especially, as you and I have talked, that the virology is absolutely nonsense. But you've reframed it with this toxic bile theory, and I've heard you say this in a couple videos, like, what if this thing that we're calling a virus, which is literally just a byproduct of a cell that is breaking down into a bunch of fragments after it's been exposed to toxins and malnourished, et cetera, what if that relates to toxic bile theory, and that it's literally just our body detoxifying? That's what it's doing. So what is toxic bile theory?
Toxic bile theory. Okay, now I'm on. Okay. Toxic bile theory, well, it came about after vitamin A toxicity. After I started learning about vitamin A toxicity, that led me to Anthony Mawson's work. Anthony Mawson, he's got about 34 papers connecting vitamin A and retinoic acid specifically to various diseases. I believe he got into it after, I think his son died of a brain tumor, and then he did a whole big paper connecting retinoic acid with brain tumors. So, but what it was he was saying that the liver would leak vitamin A into the system. It would convert into retinoic acids, and then that would cause all the damage and the symptoms. So that eventually led me to thinking about bile, because I'm like, he was talking about cholestasis. Cholestasis is basically, cola is bile, stasis is stagnation. I look at it as basically it's bile going the wrong way, any wrong way. Bile is supposed to be made by your liver, go through the bile ducts into your intestines, and then be pooped out. So since we're on that now, I have no issues with the positive functions of bile, but bile is the way your liver gets rid of toxins. Mm-hmm. Think of bile as your liver's poop. That's the best way to think of it. And now, if you're making plenty of bile, it's going to be there. It's going to do all the good things that bile does. We're not worried about that. I don't even discuss the good things about bile, because as we get the body healthy, it makes bile, it makes less toxic bile, and the bile does its job. So
obviously, bile serves a function if it's in everyone's body and it's supposed to be there.
Well, it's one of the ways that the liver, it's the main way that the liver is, it's the main way and the safest way for the liver to get rid of the toxins that are in it.
Makes sense.
So if you think of a sewage processing plant, and the sewage processing plant takes in all this sewage, it's going to process it and concentrate it, but then it has to get rid of the sewage. That's where people forget about detoxes. Detox means it actually has to leave you. Mm-hmm. If it's still in you, it's not detoxed.
Right.
It's still there. So the liver wants to get rid of the bile through the poop. The problem is as we all get exposed to shots and pharma and glyphosate and, eating too much vitamin A, taking vitamin D supplements, doing all these
non-native electromagnetic fields,
all that stuff damages the liver, and it's called liver injury. People can look it up, but of course doctors hardly ever find it because they're not very good at finding things. That's why they gave a lot of these liver diseases, they call it silent liver disease, because they're saying we know it's there, we just can't find it. We're just terrible at finding it, because they want to look at liver enzymes, and that doesn't always give you the picture. So this bile, okay. First of all, it does contain the bile and then all of the toxins that the liver might put into it. So there's toxic metals in there. There's toxic fat-soluble compounds like, the forever chemicals, all that DDT, whatever you want to go into, all that stuff is going in the bile. That's how the body gets rid of it. And then it's got retinoic acid in it, which eats holes through things. So the bile itself can eat holes, and I have research on all of this. It can eat holes in the liver cells that make the bile. It can eat holes in the tiny little bile ducts in the liver. It can eat holes in the big bile ducts. It can go back up to the pancreas, cause pancreatitis. It goes into your intestines. It eats holes in the common bile ducts. It eats holes in the intestines. This is what leaky gut is. This is what nobody ever talks about with leaky gut. People, I would love to ask people, I'm like, what causes leaky gut? And then they'll be like, gluten. And I'm like, well, you're saying gluten is eating holes in your intestines, and only in certain people's intestines.
Right.
So, but bile can do that. And then if bile goes back up into your stomach, if my live stream just this last week was all about GERD or acid reflux, and it's actually bile coming up in the stomach. Everybody who has reflux has bile in their esophagus. Not everybody has high acid levels. And if you think about it in terms of stomach and GERD, your stomach's made to handle acid. Why would acid all of a sudden start causing problems in your stomach?
Right.
Is your stomach made for bile? No, it's going backwards up the loop. So we now have something that is capable of eating holes in all of these things. By definition, bile is the most toxic fluid in the entire body. That's how you get rid of the waste. It eats holes through things. Then it can get into your bloodstream via any of those leaks I talked about. I actually have a paper showing that you can absorb bile directly into your bloodstream from the stomach. So if it goes up into your stomach, it's in your bloodstream.
Oh boy.
So we have now the most toxic fluid in the whole body going into your bloodstream. Goes everywhere. Brain, muscles, heart, all that stuff. And what I do in my live streams when I go over very specific diseases is I connect toxic bile with like the actual bile thing. So there's the amount of bile in the blood. Like if I were to show you a study on diabetics, it showed that they had twice as much bile in their blood than normal people. Okay, so we got the amount of bile. We got the recipe of the bile acids, which can change. Some meds and some other supplements are changing the bile recipe, and that's how they change the symptoms. You might get rid of one symptom, but you might create another. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing that people always miss. They're like, I got rid of this, and you're like, but now you have that. Mm-hmm. That you just traded diseases. You just changed the bile recipe. Then we have all the toxins in it, that the retinoic acid, the metals, all that stuff. So that's going everywhere. Now you normally release bile generally when you eat. So this is why a lot of people, they may not feel good after they eat, or they may eat certain things that cause more bile dumping and more leakage. So now when we're talking about leaking, certain people, so if you're leaking bile into your blood and you take a med or a supplement that slows down bile production, or we should say dumping, we could say, then all of a sudden they could feel better, because if you had a leak in a leaky faucet, right, and you have the knob, and you turn the knob halfway on, and let's say the knob itself has that little leak, right, mm-hmm. and it's a certain amount of leaking. Well, if you turn the knob back towards off, the leak shrinks too, right? Mm-hmm. Well, so you can have people feel better by slowing down their bile production, so they're simply leaking less. Mm-hmm. And that's where some people do certain things that increase their bile dumping, or as we talk about in the program, when people are pushing too hard, maybe they take a lot more soluble fiber than they tolerate. Soluble fiber will trigger bile dumping, but it also grabs onto bile. So it
also helps you poop. So it's like, yeah.
Well, we could get into that. So it grabs onto bile, but it also triggers bile dumping. So let's say in one person, soluble fiber soaks up more bile than it triggers the dumping. Then that speeds up their detox. They get rid of more stuff. Mm-hmm. But what about if you have another person where the soluble fiber triggers more dumping than it soaks up? Then you can have more symptoms. Mm-hmm. So that's why they're watching their symptoms and they're adjusting their intake. And so that you have to watch this stuff. This is my program is all about personal responsibility and actually being
so much.
You have to watch your symptoms. It's not just do this much of this. I can't, like when I see somebody on Twitter saying everybody should take 100 milligrams of zinc a day, and I'm just like rolling my eyes going, I have people who can't take 2 milligrams.
Yeah. They're
that sensitive. And they get better over time. As we make them less toxic, they can often take more zinc, but they can't at the start. Mm. So this whole toxic bile theory, when we start to understand it, that actually plays into ALDH a lot. And this is why a lot of people will feel better when they first do certain things. The honeymoon phase. Let's say you slowed down bile production, but now you're like building up pressure behind a dam in your liver. And eventually what happens when you build up too much pressure in a pipe system?
It's gonna bust.
It blows out the back, right? Yeah. So then all of a sudden, now they're leaking out of their liver straight into the bloodstream. That's called intrahepatic cholestasis.
Oh, wow.
And so every time they dump bile, it just goes right back in. And that's where they start you get the really sensitive people who can't do much detox at all, because anything you do that stimulates detox, they just feel like heck. So all we do to fix this, like the whole understanding of the toxic bile thing, is figuring out what triggers your bile dumping. And we try to minimize that. But as we fix the toxicities and the deficiencies that go along with it, the bile gets less toxic. Fixing the nutrient deficiencies gives people the nutrients they need to both protect themselves against the toxins and to detox them. And they just get better. So, I mean, we could technically, even if I never came up with toxic bile theory, if we just fixed the toxicities and the deficiencies, and then people just didn't do things that made them feel worse, I wouldn't even have to have toxic bile theory. Mm-hmm. But toxic bile theory coming about kind of gave me the whole framework of how to understand this. And when people really start to understand it, this is what they tell me. They say, I know now why certain things made me feel better at the start, and then I got worse over time. And I know why I did certain things where I felt made sense with the program. It's like what we do. And they're like, oh my gosh. And it helped me get so much better over time. Or I realize now that like I couldn't take zinc and I just kept taking zinc because somebody on the internet said to take it. And now I don't take it and I feel better. And we go, and when we, you know, we look at their labs and we go, this is the funny thing about labs too. I'll just add this here. We look at labs as like a map. It's saying like, you are here, you want to get here. But then the individuality part of it comes into, let's say somebody's zinc is low and we want them to be higher. And they try a certain dose of zinc. Let's say they get up to, let's just say 30 milligrams. And they're like, I felt good on 15 milligrams, but I feel like 30 is making me anxious and I can't sleep well and I'm just not feeling as good. Okay. So go back down to 15. Like, so when you think of the map, like Google Maps, right, there's a bunch of different routes you could take. Everybody might take a different route. We know where we're trying to go, but different people are going to have different routes to get there and need different paths. So I just give people the space and the freedom to figure that out. I give them the framework, like stay in this framework, and then you just figure out what works for you. And then certain people love it, and certain people are just like, tell me what to do or I don't want to be here. And I go, well, this is not the place
That's
for
not
you.
the place for you. I really appreciate that though, because health itself really does require personal responsibility. And of course, like you, like me, even with this podcast, you can provide good general knowledge and recommendations, things to avoid, things to look into for people, but ultimately they have to make their own decision. Yeah. That's what the whole point is, I think, of what both you and I are doing. In general, and I know this is going to be very general, especially with what I just said, what are the primary things that you look at to help facilitate detoxification when you see someone who is just so toxic that even the smallest acts of detoxification can be a little bit overbearing for them at that time?
Well, it depends because different people will have different triggers,
right?
If you know what I mean. So I have a thing in the program. I call it it's a very technical term. I call it the order of adding stuff.
Love that. Very technical.
And so like phase 0, I call it, is like hydration, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I've had people come into the program and tell me that the hydration video that I did was worth like the entire program.
Wow.
And it's mainly just like, we've been duped into like thinking that you should pee clear all day. Like that's not, if a veterinarian looks at an animal peeing clear, they immediately assume that animal has a disease. Like,
isn't that because your body's not being adequately hydrated? You're not getting hydration into your cells. You're literally just peeing out that what you've drank in.
Well, I tend to break these things down into simple terms. Yeah. I say if you're drinking water and you're peeing what looks like water, your body's saying, I'm dumping water. Like, stop putting so much water into me. Yeah. And it could be from any fluids. I mean, I remember in high school when I was doing the gallon of milk a day diet trying to gain weight, like you're drinking milk all day and you're peeing clear all day, like peeing 20 times a day. And I just went, this is stupid. But so just even that thing of don't overdrink. Like, right. You want light yellow pee, light yellow to yellow, or, you know, just, you're not trying to have it dark and smelly. You're not trying to have it clear. And so there's simple things like, so there's hydration, there's like getting sunlight, there's like making sure, you know, if you got mercury fillings, I mean, gosh, get those things out of your mouth. Like I tell people there are certain things that I can't make you get better over. Like I can't out supplement the pharmaceutical poisoning that you're putting in your body.
Right.
I can't give you sunlight. I can't, you know, with mercury fillings, like every day you have mercury fillings in your mouth, they are off gassing every time you chew, every time you drink something hot. They are still off gassing 40 years later. They've shown it on videos.
Crazy.
So if you're putting mercury in your system every day, I'll actually tell people, don't spend any money on me until you get those fillings out of your mouth. Because I can't do anything. I mean, I can try to help you, but actually, why don't we get into that real quick? There's this thing called the detox loop. That is a concept I came up with, which is, let's say somebody has mercury fillings in their mouth and they decide they're going to do a mercury detox, but they're still in their mouth. So they start taking herbs and other things to detox the mercury. So they still have intox going on. Every time they chew, every time they drink something hot, that mercury gas is going into their system. But now they took something, so that mercury is going to be in their bloodstream, coming into their bloodstream. Then let's say they start taking chelating agents or cilantro or whatever they decide to do. Now they're pulling mercury out of the tissues into the blood. So now you have mercury coming out of the tissues into the blood, and you have mercury coming into the blood from this. And now you have more mercury in the blood, and they feel worse. And then when they finally stop detoxing, they feel better. And I said, that's a detox loop to where they're stuck. They're putting it in while they're taking it out.
This is what's so tough when it comes to detoxification is that, I mean, in my experience, when I've done detoxes as an example, like I hate calling them that, but let's say I've done an extended water fast, and that was very detoxifying. There were periods where,
How do you know?
I mean, I was getting stuff out of me I wasn't adding things in, but stuff was coming out. Let's put it that way. Does that make sense?
You weren't putting anything in?
Just water.
Okay.
But stuff other than water was coming out of me. And I felt incredible afterwards.
Okay. Did the stuff come back after that though, after that period?
Not as much.
Okay.
Not as much.
Well, one of the things, let's just think about this. Let me on the fasting thing. Mm-hmm. How could fasting make people feel better? Yes, for a while you're not putting in toxins. Mm-hmm. Yes. What else are you not doing by not eating?
You're not taking in toxins.
You're not triggering bile dumps.
Yeah.
So if you were leaking bile and that was causing your symptoms, all of a sudden you're not dumping as much bile because you're just not eating.
That could make sense.
So
could it also be real quick? Could it also be that in addition to that, you're helping to facilitate detoxification because your body is not having to produce as much energy towards digestion and things like this, and it's just focused on detoxifying, flushing things out.
Well, it's just it's gonna, your guts want to move. Like if you're on an extended water fast and you're still pooping.
I did it like day 12, 13, 14.
That's where some people you dumped bile at that point. Your liver had been storing it up enough at that point that it then dumped it. It's like I can't. That's why I tell people, like, if you block up the bile long enough, it's going to blow out the back. Or even when you're fasting, your body's going to go, we got to get rid of this crap, and it's going to dump it. I've shown that bile is actually, there's a paper that shows that when so I'm just going to give some rough numbers here.
Got it. Okay.
So the normal poopers had about 500 units of bile in their poop. Mm-hmm. The diarrhea folks had 1,200 in their poop, and the constipated folks had about 200 in their poop. So bile is actually the trigger of pooping. So if you weren't eating, when you did poop, it was from bile.
Okay.
So you're saying you saw some funky stuff come out. Yeah. So you had all that however long, 12 days or whatever, of built up bile that finally came out. How would you have felt if that bile went back? Then we get into that. But then as a lot of people find with fasting, they start eating again, and a lot of their symptoms just come right back.
It didn't for some time until I was highly stressed. That was one of the biggest
stress
pieces.
Dumps bile.
Yeah, there you go.
So
yeah. But my point is, I do know multiple people who've done extended water fasts and like reversed a lot of issues that did not come back, which was really incredible.
Well, that's good. We tend to think that, could somebody fast and benefit from it? Sure. Mm-hmm. It is lower intake of toxins, and there's that break, and your body can use the energy for other things. We just tend to do it slower over a longer period of time, where we don't necessarily have to fast. If somebody said I'm going to do it, I'd be like, fine, go ahead. But
you don't have to do it though.
It's like coffee enemas. Like what coffee enemas are.
That was one of my questions I wanted to ask actually about coffee enemas, because everyone talks about that for liver detoxification, the Gerson method, et cetera, et cetera.
Bitter things cause bile dumping, probably because they're toxins in the body saying, I would like this out of here. Okay, so imagine this. So I tell people on the program, do I advocate coffee enemas? No, I don't. I mean, I don't push them. If people want to do them, like putting things up your rear end is up to you. That's your thing.
Right.
But what you're doing with a coffee enema, so coffee triggers a bile dump. This is why a lot of people notice that when they have their morning coffee, soon after that, they go poop.
Right.
It's a bile dump. I just explained the pooping and the bile.
Right.
So you take a coffee enema up there, it's going to trigger bile dumping. You dump a bunch of bile into the intestines. And then what does the enema do? It basically induces diarrhea. So it's basically an induced bile dump that you are trying to force out explosively that way.
That's my experience.
That's it. That's the same thing about the gallbladder cleanses, right? So you don't eat much for a couple days, especially not fats. You build up some bile, and then you go and you take oil to eat. What stimulates bile dumping? Fat. But if you just did the fat and you dumped the bile helps you absorb fat. That's not going to work. So you got to take the oil, trigger the bile dump, and then you take a bunch of Epsom salts or whatever other magnesium laxative so that you then explosively force it out. So people don't realize coffee enemas are an attempt to detox bile, and gallbladder liver cleanses are an attempt to detox bile. Mm-hmm. But if people don't change the things they were doing that was making all the toxic bile in the first place, they may not make much progress over time, or they just have to keep doing them over and over and over and over again because they just keep making the same toxic bile.
So basically it is, I want to be careful with my words here. Things like coffee enemas can be an effective way to detoxify, but it's not necessary according to you.
Yeah, I have people who have like migraine headaches, and they'll be like, I do a coffee enema and the migraine headache's gone in like an hour. And I'm like, yeah, you just cleaned out let me go over part of the reason for this. So when you dump bile into your intestines, so first of all, some of it's leaking, but it's also, it goes into your intestines, and then the portal vein is a vein system that basically grabs what was absorbed from your gut and then shunts it right back up to the liver. So it's this loop. So the bile to the guts, it's called the entero, which means gut hepatic liver circulation, enterohepatic circulation. So it's like this closed loop almost, except for the leaking. The leaking's a little problem there. But so if what they can do when they do the coffee enema in the middle of the migraine, and we fix migraines and headaches all the time, that's absolutely a classic vitamin A toxicity symptom.
Wow.
Headaches, skin issues, like a lot of these things. So they do the coffee enema, they get rid of that bile. Why does it take an hour for it to go away? Because they got that out, but there's still the stuff recirculating in the bloodstream. The liver has to pull that out to clear the blood so that then their headache can go away.
Got it.
So yeah, it with things like enemas, I just leave those up to people if they want to do them. We don't push them. I'm like, you'll get there. If you don't want to put things up your rear end, you don't have to.
Yeah.
But if you're into it, I have some people who are like, oh no, they help me feel so great. I'm fine with doing them. I'm like, go ahead, do them.
I know sometimes when I do them, it's so weird. Sometimes when I do coffee enemas, I feel really tired, but then sometimes afterwards I feel very energized. It's so strange.
Yeah.
And it's like one or the other. Like I never feel the same after I do one. I either feel extremely tired and want to take a nap, or I'm like, wow, I have so much energy. It's really interesting. Okay, so the question related to detoxification, essentially it's that it's going to depend on the individual, on how best to start detoxifying if they're in a very sensitive, vulnerable state.
Yeah, we start slow with everybody. It's like walk before you run, figure out if you're okay with things before you dive in.
Yeah.
And then the cool thing is as people get less toxic and their health improves, then they're able to push the detox more. So it kind of becomes like this positive cycle of where they can do more. And then they start exercising again. They might start doing the sauna. They might start doing, higher doses of niacin flushing and other stuff like that.
Well, let's get into that real quick. Okay. Niacin flushing. Yeah, because we touched on that at the beginning, but we didn't really close the loop on it.
Yeah. We'll just hit this real quick. The research is so niacin. Okay, let me make sure I say this clearly. Flush niacin, aka nicotinic acid. So I'm going to try to just make myself say flush niacin, but it's not niacinamide. It's not NMN. It's not nicotinamide riboside. We're talking about nicotinic acid or flush niacin, the stuff that gives you the itchy tingles, that kind of stuff.
Red skin, itchy.
Red skin. Yeah. But so here's a funny thing about, you need nicotinic acid to provide the NAD that runs, something like 400 different detox enzymes in the body. And this is really, really important. So when people go through the niacin flush, I actually went and I did this in the Love Your Liver program, but I went over acute vitamin A toxicity. And then I went over a sunburn. A niacin flush actually looks a lot like those, except it's much shorter. It's like an hour instead of 2 weeks. So what I actually think the niacin flush is a lot of is it's actually detoxing vitamin A out of your skin.
Wow.
And you feel it because you have sensors there. But actually there's been studies on schizophrenics with flush niacin where they're taking like 3 grams a day and they don't flush for a long time. And one of the ideas behind that is that the niacin actually goes to their brain.
So it's working, detoxifying the brain
where
first.
you don't feel it.
Yeah, makes sense.
So we don't have sensors up. Nobody feels their brain hot or itchy.
Yeah.
So anyway, so flush niacin is a big part of the program. We've got research showing flush niacin helps speed up ALDH. It helps increase bile production, which is why we have people start slow. And then it helps with fixing leaky gut. We've got like all the things we're working on, niacin helps with. And one of the big things that I believe niacin helps with in terms of vitamin A detox is like I said, flush niacin is necessary to run ALDH, which detoxes aldehydes. Well, retinol turns into retinaldehyde, and then you got to go through ALDH, and nicotinic acid or flush niacin helps it do that. So it's a really, well, and again about flush niacin is it is really an amino acid. It's not really a B vitamin. It comes from tryptophan. It comes from an amino acid. It's an amino acid. Like it fits it. The structure fits it. The amounts that people can take fit amino acids to. It's the whole B vitamin sham. I mean,
vitamins
is just,
in general.
Vitamin E is an alcohol, just like vitamin A is.
Yeah.
I mean, and then whenever you see a family of things, like when they say, oh, there's 25 different forms of vitamin D in the body, and there's 8 different forms of the vitamin E family, and that's where you start to go, wait, which one supposedly is the one we need?
Yeah.
And they'll be like, oh, well, it's D alpha tocopherol. And I'm like, what are these other 7 things?
Yeah.
Why are they in the vitamin E family? Like, So vitamin E is a bunch of garbage too. Actually, vitamin E in mouse studies has been shown to jam 20 times more vitamin A into the liver.
Oh, wow.
And then you have people saying vitamin E is so good for your skin. So if vitamin E takes vitamin A, which is really bad for your skin, and puts it into your liver, do you see how vitamin E could help your skin?
Wow.
It takes the vitamin A out and it puts it in there. We won't even get into cannabinoids. They do the same thing. THC and CBD, they pull vitamin A out of the blood and shove it into the liver too.
Oh boy.
And then you have people saying it helps my problems, and you go, well, you didn't have a cannabinoid deficiency.
Oh man.
So we just kind of blow all this apart. It's fun because then when we start fixing things, you really know what fixed it.
Yeah.
You're not stuck on an herb or whatever. Like nobody has an herb deficiency.
Really? What about over the course of time, how many people have used herbs to detoxify?
They're using herbs to do something like I mentioned about milk thistle earlier. Milk thistle slows down cytochrome P450 enzymes. It slows down detox pathways. And when you start looking at the long-term research on milk thistle, it's not that good.
Oh, wow.
So that's why whenever people say, do this, it's detoxifying. Knowing what I know, I go, show me the research. And they're just like blueberries are detoxifying. I'm like, give me something. Because I can show you that the polyphenols slow ALDH, which means it slows detox. Please show me something that says it detoxifies. And they never do. So this is just something that bothers me is when people are just like, this detoxifies. And I'm like,
where's the proof of that claim?
What does that mean? Like, how is it, show me how it's making something leave the body.
What I was going to mention earlier is how do you know whether something is detoxifying and you're just having a Herx reaction, or if you or if you laugh like every other thing I say. It just shows that, I've already looked into this. Okay, so if you're detoxifying and just having a Herx reaction, or if you're like poisoning yourself, how do you know? Nobody's
shown me a Herx reaction in the research that it's actually legit. Like,
really,
I think a Herx reaction is a bile dump.
Really,
that's it. Like if people,
and a bile dump can be good though, because like
this is the issue with toxic bile theory when people first come to it and they got to understand it.
Yeah.
So like to get somebody better detoxing wise, they have to make the bile. They have to dump the bile, and they have to get rid of the bile. That last part's the most important.
Mm-hmm.
So when people first come, they're probably they're leaking bile into their bloodstream a lot. Now, the thing you have to think about is if it goes into your bloodstream, you're only going to be detoxing it like one of 2 major ways. It's either going to be going to your kidneys or it's going to be going out your skin. If it's going out your skin, it's probably causing you skin issues. As I've shown in psoriasis skin, there's more vitamin A, multiple markers of vitamin A in the skin of psoriasis. They actually induced chemical psoriasis in mice, and then they found increased vitamin A levels in the psoriasis skin in the mice. So it was like the vitamin A went there and was part of the psoriasis.
Interesting.
So these things, we just have to get rid of stuff like Herxheimer reactions. Like as an example, let's say somebody was to use chlorine dioxide. And they can hardly take any of it because it causes what they call herxing. A lot of people in the health world will use the word herxing just to say they feel like crap.
Right.
Or they're detoxing. I feel like crap, I must be detoxing. I feel like crap, I must be herxing. And I'm like, if I can look at what you've been doing, I can tell you whether it's working or whether it's not, or whether you're just pushing too hard.
Right.
So, but yeah, as far as I think I only found 2 papers on PubMed that actually mentioned a Herxheimer reaction, and none of them were like counting dead bodies of pathogens, right? So if you don't believe, if you're a terrain theory guy and you're going, well, pathogens aren't really a thing, and then you go herxing, that can't all live together, right?
That goes hands in hand with pathogens, so then we can't call Herxheimer reactions a real thing.
So chlorine dioxide is an oxidizer. So therefore, what does chlorine dioxide speed up? It speeds up things in oxidation, which is the detox process. What I have found is as you speed up oxidation, especially ALDH, we tend to see an increase in bile dumping. So somebody takes chlorine dioxide, their ALDH speeds up, they dump more bile, they leak more bile. That's why they're sick in the first place. That's why they're taking it. And they feel bad. Over time, let's say they keep taking it and it's not too much suffering,
right?
Then they get to the point where they can take more and they don't have as bad of a reaction because their bile is less toxic and they're leaking less.
So it's inciting a bile dump, which initially for someone who's highly toxic is going to present a lot of issues, make them feel like shit because it's leaking it out in their system, especially if they have leaky gut that is caused by bile, that bile is worsening. But then over time, if they continue to take that substance, if it is a substance, let's say flesh niacin or something like this, right, that actually facilitates detoxification and is not poisoning, then over time they will start to feel better, thus showing that it did facilitate detoxification, but it was very rough in the beginning. Makes sense. Okay.
And then over time they should be able to, the key sign is that when they get to a certain point, if they stop it, that they maintain their benefits.
That's the thing.
Or that they're getting even better once they've stopped it.
Because if you have to stay on it in order to feel better, I would imagine that means the whole time it was just suppressing symptoms.
Well, not suppressing. I mean, it may be maintaining, like it may just be keeping them treading water.
Okay. Makes sense.
Yeah. They're just, if they stop it though.
But it could be suppressing symptoms though, too.
Well, I mean, symptoms are just expressions of toxicities and deficiencies.
Right. But what I mean is, like, in certain cases, if someone is taking something, like we don't need to get off on a tangent on ivermectin now, but here's an example. Someone's taking ivermectin and their symptoms immediately go away. It's like, oh, I feel better. From my perspective, and there's some, like Tim Truth has done some incredible research on this, as has Steve Falconer, to show that ivermectin is actually just helping to push toxicity further into the tissues. And it's inhibiting your symptoms, meaning it's inhibiting detoxification, and you think you're feeling better. That's what I mean, is situations like this.
So no, you're just saying exactly what I would say. So ivermectin slows, I have the paper showing ivermectin slows down ALDH.
Interesting.
Which means it slows down bile production, which is why people feel better.
Right.
It's
just pushing toxicity deeper into the tissue, essentially.
Well, it's basically, it would be slowing their detox. So we could use the, I'll put it this way. The picture in my mind of driving toxicity deeper into the tissues, I just, that doesn't appeal to my thinking.
It's not okay. I see what you're saying.
I just think of it as more as you're accumulating more toxicity.
Right. That makes sense. It's not literally like driving it deeper in the tissue. It's that it's inhibiting detoxification, which means the toxicity is staying there and your symptoms are cut off. Symptoms were detoxification itself.
And then the key sign on that would be, let's say people are taking these people taking ivermectin as like their multivitamin.
Right. Eventually
that's going to break the system, and then they're going to wonder why. everything fell apart. And this is where they're stuck, because now they've shut down their detox system for so long that then if they stop taking it, they take off the emergency brake that was on their bile production. Now they've got all this backed up toxic bile that's going to dump. But if they stop taking it, they're going to feel worse. But if they keep taking it, they know that it's causing them problems. So they're painted into a corner. They have no good way out other than stopping it and dealing with whatever comes.
Yeah.
The same thing happens. Vitamin C, ascorbic acid, in all the papers I've seen in terms of foods, compared to foods, vitamin C as ascorbic acid is the strongest inhibitor of ALDH I saw.
Wow.
Most people out there these days haven't heard of a thing called rebound scurvy, which is where people take high doses of ascorbic acid for a long time, or for a significant amount of time, grams we're talking, and then all of a sudden they stop it. And then within a day or two, they get symptoms of scurvy.
That's crazy, because people have said that scurvy is caused by vitamin C deficiency.
Right. So how could you get vitamin C deficiency within a couple days of stopping high dose? And there's all sorts of made up stuff out there. They're like, oh, your body's been processing it faster, and so it's still going. And no, it's that vitamin C, by slowing ALDH. It's an antioxidant. So antioxidants do the opposite of oxidation.
Mm-hmm.
So that would slow your ALDH, slow your bile production. So you're not making as much bile. When you stop taking the vitamin C, the floodgates open up, and all that toxicity that you weren't getting rid of just comes out into the system. Now I have a whole live stream showing that scurvy is actually vitamin A toxicity, and it's not vitamin C toxicity. An example of this would be there was
vitamin C deficiency.
Vitamin C deficiency.
Yeah, is vitamin A toxicity not vitamin C deficiency?
Correct, if I said that wrong. So there was a paper talking about doctors and sailors, and the doctor said the sailors liked to have oats in their rations because it helped keep away scurvy.
Interesting.
Oats don't have any vitamin C, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how would oats, which are very high in soluble fiber?
So because they're out at sea, they're eating a lot of vitamin A, but if they're eating oats, it's helping to carry that. Oh, wow. Interesting.
It's a fun little video I did on
You're
scurvy.
blowing my mind on this. I think there's something to the toxic bile theory. I think it's making sense.
It's a really cool thing when it comes across the right people and they get it. They're like, oh my gosh, this
I'm
all
already
makes
a terrain
sense.
guy, so it already makes sense.
Well,
right?
just think about it. If the terrain problem was an internally created thing, I mean, this is why, like, colds and flus, right? They are a triggered bile dump. We may not always know what triggered it.
Mm-hmm.
Could be, you ever have people, or maybe you've done this, where, like, let's say you've had a really stressful project,
Mm-hmm.
and you've been busting your butt to get it done, and then all of a sudden you get it done, or you take a big test,
And you get sick.
and then you get sick, or you go on vacation, and then all of a sudden you get sick, and it's like, what? So the whole thing, so acute stress will really cause a bile dump.
Yeah.
But chronic stress kind of slows it down.
Mm-hmm.
So then all of a sudden you go on vacation, or the project's over, or whatever, and then your liver just goes blah.
Yeah, because your body feels a release, so then your liver is going to feel a release too.
So then you get sick.
Yeah. Wow.
And then it's just you dumping that toxicity into your system. And once people understand this about colds and flus, they start to understand that if it happens, that's when they get to make the big choice. Because most of the things that people use to treat colds and flus, vitamin C.
Mm-hmm.
Or high antioxidant herbs like elderberry,
Mm-hmm.
or they use these other things that shut down bile production. So they feel better quicker, but they just stopped that detox process in its tracks. And then they wonder why they keep getting sick.
Mm-hmm.
Until the worst thing happens, which is where they're not well, and they may have like one autoimmune disease, two autoimmune diseases, cancer, whatever. And then all of a sudden they're saying, I don't get sick anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And they think it's a good thing. No, this has been shut down so bad that nothing.
So how do you know whether you're healthy then, according to you? Because you do want to have some detoxification sometimes, thus some colds and flus and things like this, but you don't want to be so consistently sick, because that means you're. Let me put it this way.
No, I get it. I get your question.
Yeah. Well, let me preface. Let me add a little more context. So this is a more direct question.
Okay.
Is it that if you're getting consistently sick, like every week you're getting sick, that indicates that there is something that you're poisoning yourself with consistently? If you are never sick, that indicates that your detoxification system is so clogged up and you may be inhibiting detoxification in some ways. So like a middle ground would be, I get sick every 6 months, 4 to 6 months, something like that, seasonally maybe.
I tend to think of it like a bell curve.
Okay.
So there'd be people at the people who don't get sick would be at the two different ends.
Mm-hmm.
So there would be the really, really healthy people who are doing things really, really right. And they're already they're not toxic and all that stuff. And so they don't get sick, or actually, I actually think I had come so far in this process now that I had an episode. So one of my biggest symptoms when I got the flu or whatever was I would get body aches. That was one of my biggest symptoms. But I get the other ones. I get the nose running and the chest, the throat and all that stuff. But I had an episode of this like multiple days of just aches. I didn't have all the other head stuff and all that other stuff. And I think that may have been my cold or flu. So it's like the bile is so much less toxic now that even when I do dump it, like I only get one symptom. So that would be like over here on this side where it's like people don't even, if they get sick, they don't even notice it, or it's very, very minor symptoms. Then there's on the other far side of the bell curve, which would be the people who are really, 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 really sick internally. And they don't even make big bile dumps anymore. They're just sick from the toxic bile all the time, just probably leaking all the time. And then there's the people in the middle who are still getting, regular colds and flus, different amounts. I mean, you can cause the liver injury and the toxic bile to get worse, just like a silly family member of mine did by getting the shot. And then all of a sudden she starts getting sick every month. Yeah. And it was like, that was the liver injury. And you can look up vaccines and liver injury, and they cause liver injury all the time. Of course. So, but when you think of liver injury, what they're really saying is they're saying bile is now leaking into the system. That's really what they mean. Right. So it's all over. When you look on medical stuff like cholestasis and bile leaking and all this stuff, it's all over the place. Like, I mean, the number of papers I went over in the GERD live stream was insane. I just kept showing biles there, bile. And people like, what do you mean acid reflux has bile in it? It's over and over. So when you know what to look for, you start to see it, and then you start to realize that our chronic diseases are us self-poisoning from inside. It's an inside job. And so if you can fix the inside job, you stop being diseased and you stop getting sick. So it's really quite empowering, but anytime it's empowering, it means people have to take personal responsibility for it.
No one's going to do the work for you.
No. Yeah.
This has been an awesome and mind-blowing conversation. I have a lot to think about. I'm sure those who are watching and listening have a lot to think about as well. I'm going to throw it in the show notes, all the places that they can find you, but quickly, anything that you're offering right now, anything top of mind you want to promote? Oh no, I mean, there's our normal website's nutritiondetective.com. I have myself and another partner, or another practitioner. We do testing and consultation packages. We're adding a couple more practitioners soon. That you can find on the consultation page at our website. And then the Love Your Liver program, which is kind of our flagship thing, is a do-it-yourself program. So I want to make sure that everybody's listening that it's a do-it-yourself program. It is, I consider it my life's work. That is at members.nutritiondetective.com. And that's the community. That's like over 2,000 people who have been doing it for 5, close to 6 years now. And it's very active. I've had people come in there and say like, wow, your community is like so active. And I'm like, they love it because they want to spread it because it works. And then I make a couple supplements right now. I'm huge on no additives, no fillers. We have a great magnesium lotion that people love. We didn't go over topical magnesium, but topical magnesium, I consider that's
it to
what we
be
rub
about
on our kids' tummies to get them to fall asleep.
So I consider it about 10 times as effective as pills. Okay. So I really like that. We make a great lactoferrin and keystone minerals, which is our triple mineral supplement, zinc and selenium and molybdenum. So we're just a small little company doing our thing, but we seem to be making some waves now.
Crushing, absolutely. Well, Dr. Garrett, thank you so much. This was an awesome conversation. You came highly recommended and you did not disappoint. So
awesome.
Thanks, man.
Thanks for having me.